At a certain high school, somewhere in the world, there was a group of delinquents who always targeted one particular student to bully. This boy didn't have the courage to fight back, and he hated himself for it. Besides himself, he also hated the people who ignored what was happening and those who let him suffer even though they could have helped. But most of all, he hated his bullies. Just as much as he hated his own weakness, so day and night, he wished for a chance to start his life over. And it seemed that wish came true. When he was summoned to another world, he thought this was his chance to redeem himself and move forward. But it turned out he was the new savior, known by the name Yamato Takeru. However, it seems that was no longer the case. This world had a powerful being known as the Demon King, who terrified the people and gradually made their lives miserable. Thinking deeply about it, he had to admit that someone like him, who couldn't even stand up to his bullies, could never dare to put his life on the line to fight the Demon King. However, things seemed to change for the better when he met the Saintess Edelweiss, who taught him how to be strong for the sake of everyone. As a result, he accepted the fact that he was no longer the weak person he used to be, but was now someone the people of this world trusted and relied on. So, with all his effort, he wanted to make sure he wouldn't disappoint himself or those around him. This time, he would persevere for the good of all. At first, he faced many difficulties, as expected for a beginner, but after days and months of perseverance, it seemed his efforts paid off. It was all thanks to him trying his best, day and night. However, regardless of the good things he did, people still saw him as a villain. After months of arduous training, Yamato stood before everyone, now ready to be executed. Due to his overwhelmingly incredible skills and power, people began to see him as a monster. According to the executioner, Yamato was just another person from another world who held the power to defeat the Demon King. But because they were on high alert, they thought that before Yamato could betray humanity and destroy the world like the others, he had to be dealt with immediately. And as a result, instead of receiving support from these people, he was bound by magical sealing chains. Instead of getting recognition for his efforts, he was treated like a beast. Before his execution, the executioner asked for his last words. But before he could speak, the crowd roared, demanding Yamato's immediate execution. In that situation, Yamato didn't even have a chance to defend himself, let alone look back on his life. But until the very end, Yamato remained calm and didn't cause a scene. However, amidst the crowd, there was one person shedding tears for him. The one crying for him was none other than Edelweiss. She had tried to help Yamato with everything she had, but it seemed her power and authority weren't enough. Seeing her fighting for him, Yamato felt happy. Whether in Japan or in this world, he had never been accepted, but at least there was one person who cried for him. Because of that, he was certain that this life had been a happy one, if only he had been given another chance. Before he could reminisce about those good days, blood began to splatter as Yamato's head was severed from his body. But just a few seconds later, he found himself lying in a hospital bed. He began to wonder if he had returned to the real world. But that didn't make sense, because he was sure he had died that day. Moreover, the 3 years he had spent in that other world couldn't have just been a dream. Finally, he realized it was pointless to try and think about something he couldn't understand. So, if he wanted answers, he first had to figure out his current situation. Looking at his reflection in the window, he was shocked to realize that his body was covered in bruises and broken bones. Though it seemed impossible, he tried to use the power he had learned from the other world, and surprisingly, it actually worked. The pain vanished, and he was finally able to stand on his own 2 feet. So, the fact that he could use magic proved that what happened wasn't a dream. But the thought that he might be daydreaming still couldn't leave his mind. Suddenly, a woman, supposedly his mother, entered the room with a doctor. Seeing Yamato moving around made them extremely excited. Since no one thought he could recover so soon, especially when almost all his bones were broken, the sight of Yamato suddenly standing up astonished everyone. However, the strange thing was that Yamato had no memory of the woman who claimed to be his mother. Since he couldn't explain about the bullies, he decided to feign amnesia. When his mother asked what had happened, he just replied that he was messing around with friends on the school rooftop. The fence broke, and he slipped and fell. Believing him, the doctor went on to ask if he remembered his name was Kusanagi Takeru, to which Takeru replied, yes. With everything cleared up, the doctor still couldn't believe Takeru's injuries could heal so quickly, something even a skilled healer would find difficult. This statement puzzled Takeru, as he hadn't expected healers to exist here, even though he was no longer in the other world. A few minutes later, Takeru's father appeared, crying with joy to see his son was still alive. He also said that even if Takeru didn't remember them, he was still happy that his son was safe. At this point, Takeru really didn't understand what was happening anymore. But since this was the first time he had ever felt parental love, he promised himself that he would find a way to return this body to its true owner. However, he wanted to enjoy this feeling for a little while longer. Although his parents were still worried, Takeru had to undergo numerous checkups. The results showed he was completely healthy, so he was quickly discharged after a day. On the way home, he couldn't deny that the technology in this hospital seemed far more advanced than anything he'd ever known. But his one consolation was that everyone here spoke Japanese. This definitely had to be Japan. However, there was a cleanliness to the city that he wasn't used to. If he remembered correctly, when he lived in Japan as Takaru Yamato, the year was 2000. To find out the current year, he looked closely at the news broadcast appearing on the screen next to the steering wheel. According to the news, that day marked the end of May, and they were about to enter the hot spring of 2040. This meant 40 years had passed since he lived as Yamato, but that wasn't what shocked Takeru so much. It turned out this world now had hunters, people who risked their lives to protect the daily lives of citizens. Some of the monsters the hunters fought were goblins, which confused Takeru because these creatures shouldn't be here but only in the other world. To find out more, he asked his parents about it. According to his mother, hunters really did extraordinary things because if a hunter was too clumsy, they could lose their life in an instant. The fact that they fought with magic as if it were normal showed that everything here was very different, yet completely ordinary in this world. Takeru realized that although this was Japan, it still bore too many resemblances to that other world. Not long after, a monster suddenly attacked them right in front of their eyes. Fortunately, thanks to the power he obtained from the other world, Takeru saved both himself and his parents. But just when he thought everything was fine, he was shocked to find that a spatial gate had opened. From the gate, groups of goblins began to emerge one by one. Based on what Takeru knew, goblins were monsters that even the kingdom's trained knights needed multiple people to take down. An ordinary person wouldn't stand a chance against them. But for him, he could handle them easily, because he knew he could also use magic skills. However, Takeru hesitated at the thought of showing his true power, because the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, just like what had happened in his life in that other world. Besides, this body wasn't his. If he did something out of the ordinary, it would surely cause a lot of trouble when the time came to return it, and he didn't want to be scared anymore. So he decided the only option right now was to run. But just as he was about to, he saw his parents nearly get killed by the goblins. With no other choice, he was forced to use his power. To avoid shocking his parents too much, he made an excuse that a nearby hunter had come to help. His parents felt relieved and continued to leave the scene. Although it seemed like everything was resolved, Takeru still had another problem. After he struck, there was an attack from someone else. He wondered if this was going to become a huge problem. However, since his parents were still in shock, Takeru decided to ignore it and think about it later. Since their car was wrecked, they had no choice but to walk home. Although it was a long and tiring day, they were grateful to be alive. It was a major event, and the fact that there were no casualties was a miracle. After walking for about 1 to 2 hours, the three of them finally made it home. It seemed it was time for Takeru to begin his new life. As he settled in, he knew very well that if he wanted to live this life as Kusanagi. So, if he wanted to live under the name Kusanagi, Takeru needed to gather information. He started looking for a diary in case the original owner of this body had kept one. But there seemed to be nothing. In fact, the only thing he found was a magazine about hunters, showing the former owner's interest in them. All the books in the room were about this topic. As Takeru flipped through the magazine, he discovered there was even a ranking system for hunters, as if they were celebrities. Reading page by page, Takeru came across a note the original owner had written, expressing a desire to join a specific guild if he ever had the chance to become a hunter. After learning this, Takeru felt a little strange. Even though he knew he was in Japan, things weren't the same at all. He had spent 3 years in another world, so he was getting used to strange things. Moreover, this was the first time he had ever seen or owned his own phone. Though he struggled to use it, he enjoyed learning. But no matter how hard he tried not to be startled, every time the phone notified him, he just couldn't help it. He even realized that he felt more anxiety getting a message on this phone than he did when facing the Demon Lord, especially knowing that the money for this phone came from Takeru's parents. However, with his mother's reassurance, Takeru continued to learn how to use it. Also, his mother didn't want him to return to school right away due to his health, which he thought was for the best, since his bullies had just sent him a text warning him to watch his back. Since he had a lot of free time, Takeru used it to look up information on his smartphone. He discovered that 30 years ago, after he was summoned to another world, gates had connected Earth to that world, and monsters began to pour out. They killed people, and modern weapons seemed to have no effect on these strange creatures. Out of nowhere, mages appeared and began to fight the monsters. They spread the word that magic was a skill anyone could learn, making it an essential subject. Thanks to this, people began to defeat the monsters. Those who studied magic were called mages, while those who exterminated monsters were known as hunters. Their roles became crucial in handling gate breaks and protecting daily life. That's what Takeru read online. To learn more, he decided to walk around the city himself. As he scrolled through more information, one thing was certain. Society had truly adapted to magic. The world no longer felt real to Takeru, because everything was so different from what he knew. 40 years had passed, so people had grown used to these changes. Although he didn't necessarily want to go back to his own time, he couldn't deny that he felt lonelier than he'd expected. While he was walking, a woman suddenly screamed for help when her bag was snatched. What was more interesting was that the bag snatcher used magic to escape. With no other choice, Takeru was forced to use magic to catch the criminal. After a moment, the woman thanked Takeru for his help, but she also hid her admiration for his excellent use of magic. After realizing he was faster than he expected, Takeru reminded himself to be more careful in the future. Unexpectedly, the old woman gave him some candy as a thank you. This reminded Takeru of the time he spent with his grandmother in his previous life. At that moment, he suddenly realized that even though 40 years had passed and many things had changed, the core values remained the same, and he felt happy about that. On his way home, a bully threatened him. Trying to attack Takeru, this guy thought he was a big deal, making Takeru realize that things like this don't change, no matter the era or the world. When the guy stood before Takeru, his instincts told him to fight. He kept ranting, warning Takeru not to address him so disrespectfully, and that he had to call him Araki-kun as if he were superior. The guy kept blaming Takeru, saying it was all his fault that the police suddenly came to his house, causing his father to beat him relentlessly. The man's voice grew louder, but Takeru remained calm, letting him vent all his anger. Inwardly, Takeru thought that for guys like this to still exist after 40 years, the owner of this body must have had similar problems to his in his past life. But compared to his past life, when he was so scared of people like this that he couldn't do anything, now, to him, fighting dragons in another world was far more terrifying. Compared to facing this Araki guy, Takeru felt like he was just dealing with an angry dog. It showed how much he had grown, and he even chuckled at the thought. Seeing Takeru laugh, Araki felt insulted and immediately threw a punch. But since Takeru was no longer afraid of him, he easily dodged every attack without even trying. Meanwhile, Araki was struggling. Takeru seemed to sense this and began to wonder what he should do. Although he could have easily taken the guy down with a single punch, he didn't want to draw attention, so he decided to just make Araki fall by stomping on the ground. That was his plan, but in the end, he still punched Araki when the bully started bad-mouthing his parents. At this, Araki became more furious than ever, because he never expected Takeru to fight back. As a result, Araki resorted to using attack magic in a place like this, but before he could counterattack, a gate suddenly appeared. And with just one punch from a monster, Araki was defeated in seconds. Takeru started to worry about him, but it seemed Araki wasn't dead. Since there was no one around and Araki was out of the fight, Takeru decided to take down the monster himself. With just one powerful punch, he inflicted more serious damage on the monster than he had expected. After the short battle, Takeru closed the gate since he couldn't just leave it open, especially since it was like a summoning skill from another world if the magic circle wasn't destroyed. It was possible that the gate would disappear. And surprisingly, Takeru's theory was correct. A moment later, a group of officials appeared, prompting Takeru to leave in a hurry so no one would find out he had done this. When the officials arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes because, according to their reports, it should have been impossible for anyone to take down a blood goblin in a single blow. When they reached the scene, the goblin was already dead and the gate was closed, which was something they hadn't expected at all. Furthermore, as they continued their investigation, they found a boy who had collapsed, presumably Araki, but aside from a few bruises, there was nothing unusual about him. Besides, it seemed Araki had gotten into a fight with a classmate, so they concluded that he was the one who had done all this. However, the higher-ranking official didn't think so, because she couldn't sense enough mana from Araki to have pulled this off. Suddenly, she recalled the time she saw Takeru kill a monster to save his parents. And to learn more, she decided to head back to the Hunters Association to investigate. In her mind, the blood goblin was an extremely dangerous monster. The fact that a blood goblin required multiple hunters to deal with made her very curious about this mysterious hunter who had arrived on the scene right before the Hunters Association. This intrigued her greatly, and she wanted to know more about what was really going on. After a few weeks off from school, it was time for Takeru to return to the world of academics at Kazumi High School located in the Tokyo area. When he arrived, he was quite surprised because the place felt more familiar than he thought it would. Suddenly, on his way to class, he remembered the worried look on his father's face this morning when he told him he didn't have to go to school if he still didn't want to. Deep down, even though his parents had said that, Takeru knew he was fine and there was no reason to stay home anymore. In any case, the real Takeru certainly wouldn't have liked having to repeat a year just for missing too many classes, which is why Takeru came to school today to fulfill his responsibilities as a student. While waiting in the schoolyard, Takeru couldn't help but look around at the students chatting excitedly with each other, just like a normal high school. From Takeru's perspective, the school had a relaxed atmosphere, which made him wonder why the real Takeru had decided to go so far as to end his own life. If his environment was like this, there was only one explanation. Perhaps the real Takeru didn't have many friends. This meant that Takeru's circumstances in his previous life were quite similar to what he had imagined. However, the only difference was that he had gotten a second chance in another world, where he could practice magic with others, exchange intense gazes with fellow adventurers, and fight or flee from powerful demons. This reminded him of what Edelweiss had said before, that she wanted to create a world where everyone could smile naturally. Realizing he had been lost in thought, Takeru quickly snapped himself out of it by lightly slapping his face a few times, trying to accept that there was no turning back now, and it was time for him to take the first step. Although he seemed nervous, Takeru knew he would be fine, because he had dared to face this challenge thanks to Edelweiss's encouragement. With that resolve, he immediately entered the classroom, where everyone was already seated before the lesson began. Before starting the lecture, their teacher announced that, from that day on, Takeru would be returning to class, and that due to the traumatic nature of his incident, he was currently suffering from amnesia. The teacher informed the class that for this reason, she hoped everyone could help and support Takeru through this difficult time. Right after the introduction, Takeru quickly went to his seat, and it seemed his classmates weren't very interested in his return. Then suddenly, Araki walked into the classroom, looking incredibly proud because everyone now thought he was the one who had defeated the blood goblin the other day. He was so smug that he even declared it was only natural for someone as great as him. However, when he saw Takeru sitting at the back of the class, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, since Takeru was the only one who had witnessed the goblin take him down with a single punch. Instead of teasing Takeru as usual, Araki decided to ignore him, which was strange for everyone, as Araki never behaved that way. While everyone was focused on Araki, one student seemed worried about Takeru. A timid boy with glasses approached him and shyly asked if Takeru was okay, considering he was suffering from amnesia. After realizing that Takeru probably didn't remember him, the boy with glasses introduced himself. "I'm Sawamura Takeru." Previously, Sawamura used to talk with the real Takeru, as they both shared a passion for hunters. This revelation took Takeru completely by surprise, as he never expected the original owner of this body to have any friends. As the school day passed and it was time to go home, Takeru couldn't deny that he felt more tired than he had expected. While it was true that he had become physically and mentally stronger after going to the other world, his intellect hadn't followed suit. Even back in high school, he always forgot to study, and now that textbooks were no longer made of paper, studying had become even more difficult. Despite his crisis, Takeru was still surprised with himself that, even with amnesia, he seemed to be doing pretty well. He quickly reassured Sawamura that there was no need to worry, as he was making progress every day. After chatting for a bit, Takeru asked Sawamura what he was like before, referring to the body's original owner. Without any hesitation, Sawamura affirmed, "Takeru is the best person in the world." The group of bullies tried to butt into Takeru and Sawamura's conversation, but it seemed Araki was teasing Takeru less than before, probably because of what had happened between them the other day. However, to avoid being seen as weak, Araki explained that he didn't want to get involved with Takeru anymore because it would only cause more trouble. Instead of targeting Takeru, Araki's group switched to making Takuru their next target. At first, they pretended they were going to the library to study, but knowing the bullies' personalities, that couldn't be the truth. As soon as Araki and his group left, Takeru immediately asked his classmates where the group had taken Takeru. Initially, he thought they might have gone up to the rooftop. But after everything that happened, the school implemented strict measures and closed off that entrance. This meant they must have taken Takeru to the industrial area behind the school. Takeru, rushing off to help his friend, surprised his classmates since before his amnesia, he'd never been so assertive. Meanwhile, in the industrial area, Araki and his friends were interrogating Takeru, and every time he failed to answer, they beat him mercilessly. While all of this was going on, Takeru was watching the entire situation from the shadows. As much as he wanted to jump in and help Takeru didn't want to alter the original Takeru's life too drastically. He tried to avoid drawing attention to himself, as it could complicate things. However, when Takeru remembered how Takeru had willingly come to protect him, it started to get to him. But it still wasn't enough to make Takeru intervene just yet. As the minutes ticked by, Araki and his crew kept throwing and punching Takeru around as if he were nothing more than a toy, even taunting him to call Takeru for help. It was what Takeru said next that changed Takeru's mind. Takeru admitted he felt guilty for letting his friend, someone he considered his best friend, suffer at the hands of these bullies just so he could stay safe. That's why now that Takeru was back, he had the courage to make sure he wouldn't make the same mistake of abandoning a friend when they needed him most. Hearing this set Takeru's heart ablaze, as it was the first time anyone had ever been willing to risk their life for him. And with that, Takeru knew it was time to protect his friend. A few seconds after Takeru arrived on the scene, he suddenly collapsed, causing the remaining bullies to laugh at him, calling him weak, saying he wasn't even tough enough to be a punching bag. But to Takeru, his friend was as strong as anyone. When they saw him stand up to the bullies, the whole group was stunned, never expecting he'd have the guts to confront them. They figured his amnesia had made him lose his mind and thought a single punch would be enough to take him down. But they had no idea that this was no longer the Takeru they once knew. With a single punch, Takeru easily took them all down, leaving them too stunned to speak. But Araki's lackeys were too arrogant, so instead of running for their lives, they tried to fight back, only to be utterly defeated. Seeing his cronies get beaten to a pulp by Takeru, Araki got so furious that he looked like he was about to jump in. But before he could, Takeru stopped him in his tracks, warning him that if he didn't stop running his mouth, he'd just be a nuisance to everyone. Instead of being scared, Araki's pride took over, and he declared that he couldn't let his friends think he was weaker than Takeru. This gave the remaining lackeys the nerve to charge at Takeru, even though they clearly stood no chance. He remembered a battle against the Demon King's army, where he was too naive and spared an enemy who claimed he was forced to fight. Takeru sympathized, but that moment of weakness led to the destruction of the very village he was supposed to protect. From that lesson, Takeru learned that once you commit to something, you can't do it halfway. That's why, from now on, he would never make that same mistake again, especially not when he was this furious. He decided to take down these bullies no matter what. But before he could make his move, a blue portal suddenly appeared, sending the three bullies into a panic. And when an ogre emerged from the portal, the bullies froze, not knowing what to do. Ogres are the most dangerous monsters that can appear from a blue portal. But seeing Araki there, his friends relaxed, thinking he could easily take down this monster, based on how he defeated the bloody ogre before. Unable to reveal that he wasn't the one who defeated that ogre, Araki put on a brave face and pretended to attack the monster with his magic. However, just as he expected, his magic was useless compared to a real hunter's. In the end, the ogre took him down with a single punch. As a result, Araki's friends panicked and fled. Meanwhile, Takeru remained perfectly calm, standing off to the side. And just as expected, the ogre began to charge toward him. But with just a single blow, Takeru quickly took down the ogre. Witnessing this, Araki was horrified, even starting to fear Takeru, calling him a monster. As Takeru approached, Araki demanded he stay away from him, but it seems Araki misunderstood. Takeru just wanted to help him a little by using his healing ability to ease the pain from the earlier hit. Then suddenly, Takeru slammed his hand on the ground, shattering the earth with a single touch. He then told Araki to tell everyone that he was the one who defeated the ogre, because Takeru didn't want to draw attention and just wanted a peaceful life. At first, Araki refused, but after a short talk, he finally agreed to play the part. Additionally, Takeru warned Araki not to bother him or his friends from now on, and also told him to stop bullying others. If there was a next time, Takeru wouldn't let him live. As the hunters were on their way, Takeru quickly left, taking Takura with him and reminding Araki to do a good job deceiving the officials. At the Urine Hunter Training Academy, one of the hunters reported that she had been sent to handle the gate and the ogre at Kazumi High, but by the time she arrived, everything had already been taken care of. This hunter also reported that a single male student at the scene, presumably Araki, claimed to have defeated the monster himself. However, the amount of magical energy left at the scene exceeded human limits, suggesting the presence of either a monster or someone else. Seeing the way the hunter was trembling, it meant that whoever was behind this was no ordinary person. Finding this to be a fascinating case, the organization's chief decided to investigate personally, checking Araki's description and realizing that someone else had likely defeated the ogre. While reviewing the report, the investigator noticed that Araki seemed to be arguing with someone, meaning another person was at the scene. But when the officials arrived, no one else was there besides Araki. Could that be the person truly behind all of this? Although there was no concrete evidence yet, she decided she would question Araki to get to the bottom of things. It was all for the good of the people, and the person leading this investigation was none other than the S-rank hunter, Sakura. A few days later, the entire class, including Araki's own friends, were stunned by his sudden change. They found it both funny and strange that Araki now seemed so much more composed and serious. Even when his friends tried to tease Takeru, Araki immediately stopped them, leaving Takeru completely bewildered. But before things could get any weirder, Takeru showed up, changing the atmosphere. While they were talking, Takeru asked Takeru if he knew what had happened to Araki, since he'd been acting so strangely all morning. Instead of telling the truth, Takeru just replied that maybe Araki had decided to become more diligent, and that this was a good thing. As the bell rang to signal the start of class, Sakura also arrived at Kazumi High to conduct her investigation. Nowadays, everyone knows that all hunters are managed by the Hunters Association. So, the thought of someone with such immense power acting freely on their own made Sakura extremely worried. That's why she was determined to find this anomaly, no matter what it took. As she was about to enter the school, she happened to run into another S-rank hunter, Abakawa-jin, also known by his alias Orochi. Orochi immediately asked Sakura why she was here, but before she could answer, he cut her off, saying she didn't need to. Sakura then asked if it was all right for Orochi to be here, since he was the guild master of Ouroboros. Orochi was in charge of the Tokai region, so he immediately reassured Sakura not to worry, as their guild had plenty of excellent people. Just from this conversation, the tension between the two was obvious. In her heart, Sakura was certain Orochi couldn't be here without a reason. Knowing that Orochi's Ouroboros guild was famous for its aggressive recruitment methods, it was likely he was here for the anomaly. Simply put, Orochi was probably looking to increase his power by recruiting another talented hunter. As the two S-rank hunters were talking, they were suddenly interrupted by a magic gate that unexpectedly opened right on school grounds. Students began to panic, and the teachers quickly told everyone to remain calm and evacuate in an orderly fashion. Sakura immediately went on alert, preparing to head in and help. But she was surprised to see that Orochi wasn't coming with her, and was instead heading in the opposite direction. He coldly stated that Sakura could handle it herself, and that he didn't have time to deal with such trivial matters. Orochi's words made Sakura extremely annoyed, as she felt he wasn't properly fulfilling his duties as a hunter. However, what Sakura didn't know was that Orochi had sensed something unusual. It seemed the magical energy he felt when the gate opened was much stronger than anticipated, so he wanted to prepare thoroughly before confronting it, leaving the initial response to Sakura. When Sakura arrived, the entire school had already descended into chaos. It seemed the number of enemies was far greater than she had imagined. Pushing herself to the limit, Sakura tried to save as many students as possible, ensuring they all got out safely. She checked each room carefully, one by one. Surprisingly, some students with combat experience were able to take care of themselves. After all, the skeletons and ghouls were just low-level monsters, so the students could manage. However, this strange situation could still cause trouble since the students had never been trained for this. Therefore, Sakura continued her mission, helping everyone to the best of her ability. As she rushed to where the gate had appeared, Sakura was astonished to see Takeru creating a magic circle in an attempt to calm the situation. The moment she saw him in that room, Sakura instantly realized he was the anomaly she had been searching for all this time. Knowing he had been discovered right after closing the gate, Takeru hastily fled from Sakura as fast as he could. However, it seemed Sakura was determined to capture this anomaly at all costs. While Takeru ran at full speed, Sakura used lightning acceleration to quickly give chase. Sakura herself was surprised to see that Takeru, using only a simple physical enhancement skill, was much faster than an ordinary person. Even her lightning acceleration skill, which should have given her a superior advantage in speed, didn't seem to be working as expected. Nevertheless, the possibility that she could catch up still existed, so Takeru didn't dare to look back, avoiding revealing his face to Sakura. But there was no doubt about it. Takeru could feel Sakura's pressure even from this distance. Although Takeru could speed up if he wanted to, since physical enhancement is magic that increases the body's capabilities, for some reason he couldn't. This was the limit of Takeru Kusanagi. If he were in his original trained body, he would likely be kilometers away by now. Even thinking more deeply about this wouldn't change anything. In any case, magic originates from the soul and he had it under control, but being careless now would be very dangerous. The idea of training Takeru's body crossed his mind, but for now he needed to focus on concealing his identity as much as possible. Using enhanced flight, Takeru instantly vanished into the air thanks to his speed. At this point, Sakura decided to temporarily give up the chase. Meanwhile, a few minutes later, Takeru was quite a distance from the school. Considering what had happened, classes for the day were surely cancelled, so there was no reason for Takeru to go back. On his way home, Takeru began to think that the person chasing him was probably a hunter. When he had looked them up online, he thought they were like knights or adventurers from another world, but it seemed the reality was quite different from what he had imagined. That's why Takeru decided not to be careless anymore. As soon as he got home, his mother hugged her son tightly, overjoyed to see him safe. It seemed the parents had heard the news about an ogre appearing at Takeru's high school. Since he hadn't answered his phone, his parents had been extremely worried about him. Speaking of his phone, Takeru started looking for it, guessing he must have dropped it at school. To his surprise, his mother said that a friend of his had brought his phone home for him and was now in the living room. Takeru's mother wanted him to thank his friend personally. The moment he saw who his mother was referring to, Takeru froze because it was none other than Sakura, who looked amused to see Takeru's shocked face. Despite trying his best to hide his identity, Takeru acted as if he wasn't the person who had just been chased and simply thanked Sakura for returning his phone. However, it seemed Sakura had already seen through what Takeru was trying to hide. She stated bluntly that she wanted to ask him a few things. Takeru, still trying to feign ignorance, gave a forced smile and asked Sakura what those questions were. Without any hesitation, Sakura mentioned the incident at the abandoned factory yesterday, and the incident with the blood-soaked ogre that had just occurred. At this point, Takeru realized he could no longer run away. Things were much worse than he had imagined, because now there was no way to escape. Moreover, he couldn't speak openly about the matter here, especially with his mother listening. So Takeru tried to distract his mother, hoping she would give them some private space to talk. Fortunately, after a moment of hesitation, his mother left. To be able to speak clearly, Takeru decided to lead Sakura up to his room. As soon as the door closed, Sakura immediately demanded to know who Takeru really was. This left Takeru completely shocked, as he hadn't expected Sakura to be so direct. Even if Sakura asked who he was, Takeru had no intention of revealing anything. So, Sakura declared that depending on his answer, she might be forced to restrain him if she had no other choice. At this point, Takeru started to feel that Sakura was a rather rude person, and he slowly realized that if he told a clumsy lie, Sakura would figure it out sooner or later. But even if he told the truth, that he was a hero from another world, it was highly likely Sakura would just think it was a joke. Seeing Takeru remain quieter than usual, Sakura's patience began to wear thin. She finally pinned him against the wall, putting them both in an extremely awkward situation. It seemed Sakura truly thought Takeru was doing something wrong, which was why he was staying silent. To clarify the situation, Takeru explained that wasn't the case. In fact, he had amnesia, so logically speaking, he didn't remember anything. But if that were true, how could he fight monsters? Moreover, he seemed to have a great ability to sense and use magic, to the point where he remained calm even in an emergency. Takeru tried to speak calmly with Sakura to avoid arguing too much. To make the story sound more convincing, he went on to say that he himself didn't know how he could do it. However, just as Takeru had predicted, this excuse went too far and only made Sakura more suspicious. Unsatisfied with his answer, she pressed him on why he was hiding his powers. Surprisingly, this time Takeru answered frankly, saying that even if he had suddenly gained this power, he didn't want to use it. because if he used his power, it would scare a lot of people. Besides, Takeru didn't want to worry his parents and had absolutely no intention of becoming a hunter. However, it seemed Sakura didn't believe him, since no one would refuse the chance to gain high social status, fame, and everything that came with it. Without a moment's hesitation, Takeru answered seriously that he didn't need any of those things. All he wanted was to live a peaceful life. This took Sakura by surprise, as she hadn't expected Takeru's reason to be so profound. At this point, Sakura began to understand Takeru's perspective. As long as he didn't use his powers for evil, she and the Hunters Association had nothing more to say. Furthermore, Sakura assured Takeru that she would report to the association that everything had been resolved, so they wouldn't investigate any further. Sakura's reaction wasn't what Takeru had expected, so he was a bit surprised at first. Sakura explained that although she didn't believe him right away, when she realized that all Takeru had done was protect others, she couldn't help but acknowledge the truth. The discussion ended there. Before leaving, Sakura apologized to Takeru for suddenly chasing him down and for being violent in his home. Seeing Sakura bow her head to him made Takeru a bit uncomfortable, so he quickly reassured her that she didn't need to worry about it. Then, with a serious expression, Sakura unexpectedly suggested that Takeru consider becoming a hunter, so that others could live in peace. After all, he couldn't hide his powers forever, but if Takeru truly decided to live a normal, peaceful life, then Sakura would do everything in her power to protect that, no matter what happened. Hearing those words, Takeru was suddenly reminded of Edelweiss, making him realize that there were still good people in this world. A few days later, Takeru decided to go for a run, since exercising helped him calm down. The school was still temporarily closed due to the recent disaster, so this was what Takeru had been doing for the past few days. On one particular day in the middle of his run, a black gate suddenly appeared. The authorities intervened just in time to ensure everything was under control, as it would take a while for the black gate to fully break and for powerful monsters to pour out. Technically, it was possible to close the gate and prevent any damage to this world by defeating the boss monster. Seeing so many people gathered around, Takeru began to wonder if they were waiting for the hunters to return. He also wondered if the world inside that gate was another world, perhaps the one he once knew. The thought of entering the gate crossed Takeru's mind. Just as Takeru was about to step inside, the Wind Guard party appeared, catching his attention and reassuring everyone that there was no need to be afraid anymore. The much-talked-about Wind Guard party consisted of 4 members: Shirai Chika, Tomita Yuichi, Amamiya Matsuri, and their leader Gatu Mamoru. When the group appeared, the crowd grew much more lively. Witnessing their camaraderie, Takeru was involuntarily reminded of his time in the other world. Gatu Mamoru reminded him of the general he used to train with, which made him smile a little. Flashback. General Grotto of the Kingdom was the one who helped Takeru develop his swordsmanship and combat skills. However, no matter how hard he tried, Takeru could never defeat Grotto. That didn't mean Grotto didn't appreciate him, though. In fact, at the time, Takeru was a messiah, chosen by the gods. And Grotto was certain that Takeru's physical strength and magical abilities would grow at an astonishing rate in the years to come. Still, Takeru always wondered why he couldn't land even a single blow on Grotto. Grotto explained that no matter how fast someone was, a powerful attack always left an opening. It all depended on how Takeru used his power. That meant Takeru could create his own opportunities. Their conversation was going smoothly when a demon suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was a type of demon they had never seen before, leaving them both confused as to how it could have gotten so close. While they were still wondering, the demon found an opening and attacked, injuring Grotto. Takeru, paralyzed by fear, couldn't do anything to help the general. Grotto, who always put others' lives before his own, told Takeru to run immediately while the demon was still distracted by him. But Takeru couldn't bring himself to leave Grotto behind. However, after Grotto desperately pleaded with him to go, because he couldn't bear to lose another important person after already losing his wife and son, Takeru found himself charging straight at the demon, slicing it in two, even though he desperately wanted to run away. He couldn't just use the general as bait, and besides, Takeru had decided that he wouldn't be his old self anymore. With everything he had, he tried to destroy the monster at all costs. In the end, with sheer determination, Takeru unexpectedly defeated the demon, leaving Grotto utterly astonished. Seeing Gatu, Takeru was reminded of the general again, as they shared a certain resemblance. Speaking of training, it had been 3 hours since Takeru started, but his ears still felt strange. Instead of thinking too much about it, he decided to focus on doing more cardio to build up his stamina. As for his diet, Takaru decided not to change it, since his body had no trouble losing weight. Of course, this new body felt different from his old one, which was why he needed to make adjustments to avoid changing his physique too much. As he was peacefully contemplating his next training routine, the wing guard group returned, but it seemed there was a problem. One of the members, Chika, was still inside the gate because she had decided to act as a decoy so the team could escape. Gato felt he could never forgive himself for letting that happen. Hearing this, Takeru realized he was witnessing an alternate future of a past event, and if no one went to the rescue, the situation would only get worse for the group. Then suddenly Takeru realized he was already inside the gate, though he wasn't sure when it had happened. He had unconsciously stepped inside while his mind was in turmoil. Now that he was inside, there was nothing else for it. Takaru decided to find Chika himself. As he began to scout the surrounding area, a monster spotted him. The question now was, could Takeru survive this dangerous situation? Takeru felt a sense of nostalgia upon entering this world. He couldn't tell for sure if this was the parallel world he had once been in, or if the forest was simply stirring up old memories. However, he noticed that all the monsters here were very familiar. After a moment, Takeru realized that this world was indeed the one he had once belonged to. Suddenly, Chika appeared out of nowhere, pursued by a one-eyed monster. In a panic, worried about her teammates, Chika tripped and fell, giving the monster an opening to attack. But before things could get any worse, Takeru managed to use his ice magic to block the attack just in time. Takeru's appearance stunned Chika. She never expected someone to come to her rescue so quickly. For his part, Takaru said he was just glad he made it in time. Although Chika had a few bruises, that seemed to be the extent of her injuries. To avoid questions about his identity, Takeru simply said he was a passerby. However, it seemed that Chika didn't believe him, as she quickly realized this strange man was the same boy they had seen outside the gate, thanks to his identical clothes and voice. Chika's sharp memory left Takeru a bit flustered. Since he'd been found out, there was no longer any reason to hide. Chika, who was in charge of investigating and scouting hunters, had incredibly sharp observation skills, which was probably why she recognized Takeru so easily from the start. Before things got any more complicated, Takeru urged her to get a move on since everyone outside was worried sick about her. Hearing this, Chika felt a wave of relief as it meant her teammates were safe. However, somewhere else in the gate, the boss of this place was getting excited because the time for the greatest battle was fast approaching. As they headed back to the gate, Chika began to wonder how Takeru was so powerful, despite not carrying any equipment. Furthermore, the ice magic he used was only a basic level spell, nothing special. On top of that, Takeru looked like he was dressed for a trip to the convenience store, so it was highly unlikely he had just stepped into a gate full of monsters. This made Chika wonder more and more who this boy really was. In the middle of her thoughts, Takeru suddenly stopped, which confused her. Then, out of nowhere, an attack from the gate's boss came flying at them. The massive explosion and the chaotic scene nearly made Chika pass out from fear, leaving her completely frozen. Takeru had no choice but to scoop her up and run. Meanwhile, Takeru's power also surprised the gate boss, as the boy had just obliterated her pet and then vanished. This forced the gate boss to get more serious about the fight. Knowing things were about to get more complicated, Takeru asked Chika if she had any items that could conceal the area as they left the gate, and it turned out she did. As they neared the gate, Takaru asked Chika to keep his identity a secret, which she had already anticipated. Before leaving, Takaru made sure Chika went through first so that no one would see him. On the other hand, the gate boss was not pleased at all, as she still wanted to continue playing with them. But now that the gate was closed, all she could do was hope to meet them again next time. Back on the outside, the Wingguard group was overjoyed to see that Chika was still safe. Meanwhile, Takeru hid behind the trees, checking to see if Chika was okay, trying to conceal his identity to avoid drawing attention. A few days after the incident, Takeru's classes resumed. At school, it seemed Araki had changed a lot, not just in his behavior, but also in the way he dressed. What was more noticeable was that the relationship between Araki and Takeru seemed to be developing in some way. Currently, Takeru and his two friends were no longer attending their old school, as their high school had decided to temporarily enroll the three of them at Uran Academy, since their old school was undergoing repairs after the disaster caused by the gate break. This came as a huge surprise to the three of them, as it wasn't something they had expected. When the incident occurred, each hunter training school decided to arrange spaces so that classes could continue. The curriculum would be adjusted to fit the schools, almost like a form of internship. This temporary academy was expanded to serve as both a place of learning and a potential shelter. This was the first time Takeru had experienced something like this, just like most people. That made them a little excited, and being sent to Uran Academy only made things more interesting. However, Takuro couldn't deny that he had mixed feelings about Araki coming along too. Immediately, Takeru reassured him that Araki wouldn't be able to cause any trouble here, since this was one of the most prestigious academies in the country after all. There was no way Araki could act arrogant in a place like this. So, Takeru advised Takuro to just forget about Araki for a while so the group could make the most of this experience. As expected, Uran Academy was impressive. The famous hunter Takamina Sakura was here too. On top of that, many of the Academy's alumni were currently at the top of the rankings. Studying here was like a dream come true for Takuro. While Takuro went on and on about how impressed he was with the Academy, Takeru noticed that almost all the students here were carrying weapons, ready to fight at any moment. However, his observation was cut short when Takuro started asking if he had met Sakura in person, since she was the one who had picked up his phone and asked for his address. Since there was no reason to lie, Takeru answered honestly. This made Takuro a little jealous. Spurred on by curiosity, Takuro kept asking if Takuro had exchanged contact information with Sakura. Takuro just gave a forced smile and avoided answering. And luckily, Takuro finally stopped pestering him with those questions. Instead, Takuro mentioned that he'd heard Sakura had a very passionate fan club, and advised Takeru to be careful if he got too close to her. Because there was no telling what that club might do if they found out Sakura had personally returned Takeru's phone. Just then, Sakura suddenly appeared, drawing everyone's full attention. All eyes turned towards her. Takuro couldn't deny that he was truly impressed by her presence. Even on school grounds, Sakura gave off the air of an untouchable flower, just as Takuro had described. This made Takeru wonder if Sakura had any close friends. As Sakura's gaze passed over him for some reason, Takuro unconsciously smiled and greeted her, which completely surprised Takuro, who never thought Takuro would act like that. Realizing what he'd done, Takuro felt embarrassed for a moment, and to escape the awkwardness, he quickly ran off to the cafeteria, completely leaving Takuro behind. After class, Sakura and Takeru had a meeting. During this meeting, Sakura informed Takeru that after he helped Chika the other day, even though his identity hadn't been revealed, as promised, people had started to become more curious about him. This led to many people conducting their own investigations into Takeru. Sakura also said that there would be a limit to how much she could help cover up Takeru's identity, especially with the Hunters Association in an uproar. That meant things were about to get more difficult for him. Based on Sakura's investigation, they could estimate the strength of the boss in the Black Gate based on its mana levels. When the Windguard party entered the gate the other day, it was a D-rank gate, and a C-rank hunter party should have been able to clear it within 10 minutes. However, an A-rank Cyclops appeared, which gave them a lot of trouble. Furthermore, what made the story more interesting, but also more complicated, was the unexpected appearance of an irregular, namely Takeru. Since he wasn't registered with the association, his appearance on the scene made many people ask, is this person friend or foe? Sakura also hypothesized that if an enemy possessed magical power as strong as Takeru's, it would undoubtedly cause an uprising. This made Takeru feel a bit guilty for jumping into the situation without thinking it through. Noticing she might have been a bit harsh in her approach, Sakura reassured Takeru that he didn't need to worry too much, because what he did was absolutely the right thing. Even though he had special powers, Takeru was still just a civilian who wanted to protect his peaceful life. Sakura gave a charming smile and asked Takeru to promise her that he would protect his own life at all costs and leave the dangerous stuff to the hunters, because his parents would surely worry if he kept getting involved in situations like that. After discussing the important points, they ended the meeting. On the way back to class, Takeru realized that Sakura's kindness was the reason everyone admired her. He hadn't even had a chance to relax when suddenly, a horde of goblins started charging towards them. Seeing this, Takeru was no longer scared like he used to be, as he had grown accustomed to these sudden situations. But because of the conversation he just had, he felt reluctant to be the first one to act. After a moment, a group of hunter students rushed in to handle the situation. Although the fight was quite a spectacle, what surprised Takeru was that this group was the very same Sakura fan club he had heard about. The club president Yoda was more energetic than Takeru had imagined. This A-rank hunter party seemed very eager to befriend Takeru, but he wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it. Yoda, finding Takeru's silence strange. immediately concluded that Takeru was probably wondering about the Uran Society. Even though Takeru didn't ask, Yodoin explained everything. Because he admired Sakura so much, Yodoin described her as a beautiful goddess who needed to be protected. Her admirers gathered together and protected the city. With its ever-growing number of members, the club is now the largest guild in the school, protecting the public peace. This made Takeru wonder if this was still just a fan club. Bayuduan continued to explain that the only condition for joining the club was to love and respect Sakura. Even if you weren't a hunter, just being a supporter or doing any other kind of work, there was still plenty to do in this guild. It was the way Takeru looked at Sakura that gave Bayuduan the idea that perhaps Takeru actually wanted to join their club. From Bayuduan's perspective, he saw Takeru as a perfect fit for the club, perhaps because of the powerful aura Takeru gave off. However, Takeru knew he wasn't good at dealing with people like Bayuduan. But it seemed Bayuduan had already decided that Takeru should join, especially after seeing how unusually calm he was when the monster almost attacked him earlier. Bayuduan realized that wasn't normal behavior at all, and it seemed things had gone further than expected. Takeru immediately tried to clear things up, explaining to Bayuduan that he only stood still because he was caught by surprise, and that there was really nothing special about it. Suddenly, Sakura appeared, rushing to check if everyone was okay, as she had sensed the gate that had just appeared. Since the situation was already resolved, Takeru was about to tell Sakura that a group had already handled it. But just as he was about to introduce them, he froze when he realized the group had vanished. Takeru decided to just drop it and didn't mention them again. The next morning, Takeru was still wondering about the group he met yesterday, but whatever their purpose was, he wanted to avoid getting involved. Still, he couldn't help but be surprised that such a large guild existed within the school. Even so, this no longer surprised Takeru, as Sakura's influence had been clear from the very beginning. Because of that, he wanted to be more careful and avoid getting in their way so he wouldn't cause any trouble for himself. However, it seemed Bayuduan was very determined to get Takeru to join their club. As Takeru was getting ready for his morning class, he was surprised to see Bayuduan already waiting at the door. Although Takeru wanted nothing to do with him, it seemed he had no other choice, since Bayuduan was also part of the class. Throughout the lecture and even after it ended, Bayuduan kept his eyes on Takeru, which made him feel uncomfortable. On top of that, Takeru, one of Bayuduan's biggest fans, kept telling Takeru about the talents of the Bayuduan family heir, which annoyed him even more. A famous clan of spearmanship that has existed for over 1,000 years, the Bayuduan family was known for its incredible power, so much so that Bayuduan was once called a prodigy. In addition, he was one of the top 5 hunters at Uran Academy. This made Takeru realize that Bayuduan was truly exceptional, even without the club. Takeru was eagerly looking forward to the next class at the Academy's training grounds, so he could witness Bayuduan's talent firsthand. This class made Takeru quite excited, since training sessions like this weren't something you'd find at a normal school, unless someone from the association came to teach. Including this training in the curriculum showed just how prestigious Uran Academy really was. During the training session, the school used DS monsters to train students in actual combat. The type of DS monster usually used was a slime, which, according to the professor, was a good monster for learning basic skills. These slimes change their form based on data fed into the DS house, which is short for doppelganger slime. When he saw them transform into goblins, Takeru wondered if it was really okay to let students fight them. But then he realized they were just fake monsters created by mages for practice, so there was nothing to worry about. As the training began, many promising students started to show their potential with each match. The professor offered constructive advice to help them develop in the long run. When it was Bayuduan's turn to show his skills, everyone was amazed by his incredible technique. After a few minutes, it was finally Takeru's turn, along with Takeru and Araki. Before they started, the professor asked Takeru to choose his weapon first. These weapons could be used by either hunters or mages. If the professor had any advice, he would suggest Takeru start with a sword. After all 3 had chosen, they got into position to begin the attack. As soon as the bell rang, Takeru and Araki immediately charged in, while Takeru stood back and watched. This confused many people, but what happened next surprised the audience. When there was only one enemy left, everyone thought Takeru wouldn't make a move. But surprisingly, the enemy was defeated without anyone seeing Takeru swing his sword. This showed that Takeru's sword technique was on par with that of ranked hunters. Not wanting people to think he was too skilled, Takeru quickly asked Araki to help cover for him, blaming it on the slime not realizing it had been cut. Although Araki didn't want to go along with it, he was forced to agree, which confused Takeru when he saw the two of them suddenly seem closer. Meanwhile, it seemed Byuduan's interest in Takeru was growing even deeper, especially after he witnessed Takeru fight with his own eyes. The day after the training session, Takeru went to the library to find a way to return the body to its true owner. However, he gradually realized this was not going to be simple at all. Even so, Takeru had an idea of who he could ask for clues. There was a magazine he had received from Sawamura, which contained a story quite similar to his own situation. The girl in the magazine also went through the same thing, but her soul was still intact, unlike Takeru, who had no real soul in this body. This made Takeru wonder if the original owner of this body still existed inside him. As he was pondering this, Byuduan suddenly appeared, clearly wanting to approach Takeru once again. After becoming more interested in learning about Takeru, Byuduan concluded that Takeru was probably hiding his true strength. But instead of being shocked or worried, Takeru remained calm, which made Byuduan even more insistent that he was hiding something. Despite this, Takeru didn't let himself be overwhelmed and simply replied that he was just an ordinary student with amnesia. However, it seemed Byuduan didn't believe this explanation. To test it, Byuduan suggested Takeru join him in a duel, but Takeru immediately refused. But when Byuduan mentioned Hunter Wasugi, the person who appeared in Takeru's magazine, he started to become interested in talking with Byuduan because he wanted to know more about this legendary hunter. Byuduan revealed that he had met Wasugi at a gathering of martial artists, but Wasugi had probably returned home by now. She usually took refuge in the sacred mountains, so meeting her was not easy. However, Byuduan could use his family's connections to arrange a meeting with Wasugi. This meant Byuduan could help Takeru, but only if Takeru agreed to a duel with him, using some of the tamed creatures that had appeared on campus. Takeru and Byuduan began their match. From the very moment the fight started, the way Takeru held his sword and moved made Byuduan realize that his suspicions were correct. Takeru was truly stronger than he looked. However, Takeru couldn't deny that Byuduan was also very strong. But since they had an agreement, Takeru tried his best to ensure that he would win at all costs. When he used the Bloodburst skill, Byuduan began to feel like he was facing death, causing him to be overwhelmed by Takeru's presence. And in the end, Takeru was victorious. Instead of being sad, Byuduan was surprisingly happy, as this confirmed that Takeru was who he thought he was, much stronger and braver. Suddenly, the large pillar attached to the wall transformed into a minotaur. Takeru immediately prepared to deal with the monster, but Byuduan stopped him in time, telling him to run. Even though Byuduan now knew about Takeru's true power, he didn't want to let him bear the responsibilities of a member of the Uran society. Despite being defeated by Takeru with just a single finger, Byuduan understood that Takeru just wanted to be a normal person. As the club president, Byuduan wanted to realize Sakura's ideals and take on the duty of protecting Takeru at all costs. Byuduan also apologized to Takeru, saying that he knew he wanted to keep his identity a secret, but had unintentionally dragged him into a fight. To make amends, Byuduan promised to become a selfless and kind person, just like his idol. 4 years ago, at the Byuduan family dojo, Byuduin Soma, then a first-year middle school student, was winning match after match. The other students couldn't believe how strong he was. With such power, everyone assumed Byuduan was blessed by the heavens. Only the head of the clan could defeat this child prodigy. However, Byuduan's father was not pleased with his attitude. He believed that skill alone was not enough. One needed true strength. To mock his father, Byuduan even mimicked his words, saying that a person must always protect and lead others with a heart that remains unshaken by any hardship. Hearing these words day after day made Byuduan sick of it. When his training session ended, he rushed home, ignoring his furious father. Despite his happy and confident exterior, Byuduan actually loved being praised, seeing it as a special talent. Living in a large house and being good-looking also gave him a confidence that others didn't have. Although he appeared carefree, Byuduan still admired his father for his sincere words about protecting others. However, no matter how you looked at it, to Byuduan, a strong person was simply a strong person. Deep down, he believed monsters were easy to defeat, so he didn't pay much attention to his father's words. So, when the opportunity to face a black gate arose, Duan immediately rushed in, aiming to gain real combat experience to prove himself right. But the gate he entered was incredibly dangerous, making the adults outside worry for him. Even though they tried to stop Duan, there was nothing they could do once he was inside. They couldn't just go in and help him, as they would likely be killed too. All everyone could do was pray that an A-rank hunter would arrive soon to help. Fortunately, after a few minutes, an A-rank hunter appeared, telling everyone to back away as it wasn't safe to be near the gate. Meanwhile, inside the gate, Duan couldn't believe what he was seeing. All this time, he thought his skills were enough to destroy any monster, but now he realized he was wrong. When a monster grabbed his arm in that very moment, he thought this was the end for him. However, to his surprise, someone came to his rescue. Something he never expected. Duan started to wonder what was happening. Why only one person had come to save him, and whether this woman could defeat the monster on her own. As much as he wanted to move, fear kept Duan paralyzed. Meanwhile, his rescuer was also struggling against the monster. But instead of worrying about Duan, she remained calm, and even asked if he was hurt, even though she was the one who was injured. It was at this moment that Duan began to understand what his father had told him about true strength. This was also when he realized how truly weak and fragile he was. But this girl, despite her injuries, flashed a wide smile as if she had already defeated all the monsters. She quickly ran over to Duan and told him it was time to go back because everything was okay. That's why, finding himself in a similar situation with Takeru, Duan decided to change, refusing to be weak any longer. He wanted to become stronger so that if he fought alongside Takeru, he wouldn't feel ashamed. Even though the Minotaur was an A-rank monster, Duan told himself he had to defeat it, no matter the cost. However, Takeru noticed something about the way Duan fought. Although Duan's skills were clearly excellent, he seemed overly cautious. From Takeru's perspective, a simpler fighting style would be more effective, since his opponent was a monster, not a human. To help Duan, Takeru decided to activate the latent magical power within Duan's body. This was only a temporary boost, and it might make Duan feel like he was about to die afterward, but Takeru was certain it would give him enough power to send the monster flying. After that powerful blow, Duan couldn't believe what had just happened. While he was still in shock, Takeru began to check their surroundings and suddenly realized someone was watching them from a distance. It seemed the villains of this story had decided not to let Takeru out of their sight anymore. No matter what happened, they would do everything they could to capture Takeru, the one considered an anomaly. Even though he was stronger than an S-rank hunter, Takeru was still human, and he surely had to have a weakness of his own. The question was, how did they find out that Takeru was the one who had defeated not only the Cyclops but also the Minotaur? We'll find out the answer soon enough, one way or another. Quickly, summer vacation was approaching, and Takeru woke up from a nightmare about his past. When he found it hard to breathe, he instinctively thought he was back in that world, but luckily he was still here, since he still had to go to school. He hurriedly got ready and went downstairs for breakfast with his family. While eating, Takeru started wondering about his plans for the upcoming summer break. He had asked Duan to arrange a meeting with Wisugi during the break, and Duan had promised to do so. Takeru hoped to find a clue on how to return this body to its rightful owner. But as he thought about it, Takeru began to wonder if he would disappear forever if the original owner returned. While this might be a heavy thought for others, Takeru wasn't too bothered by it anymore, since he had already died once before. All he wanted now was peace. His thoughts were interrupted when his parents worriedly asked if he was okay, as his face looked very pale. To keep his parents from worrying, Takeru just said that he'd had a nightmare, and that it was nothing serious. However, it seemed his father was still worried. Takeru's parents only knew that he had lost his memory, so they feared this could be a sign of another illness. They couldn't bear for anything else bad to happen to their son. Seeing his parents so worried made Takeru smile because the love they had for him was truly unconditional. Because of that, Takeru became even more determined to return this body to its rightful owner as soon as possible. However, his parents wouldn't let him go to school without getting a medical checkup first. Instead of going to class, Takeru was excused from school to go to the hospital for an examination. There, he unexpectedly ran into the hunters from the Wind Guard. They were also shocked to see Takeru, not expecting that they would meet again. It turned out the Wind Guard had also been sent here for treatment, and they were now cleared to go home. Seeing Chika, Takeru wondered if she had really kept quiet about him to the others. Chika's expression was so tense, and she couldn't stop fidgeting, which made Takeru guess that she had kept his secret. The atmosphere grew awkward, and Chika broke the silence by cheerfully saying she was so happy that everyone was okay. To avoid any more questions, she quickly left. Meanwhile, Gatu revealed that he knew Takeru was the one who had saved Chika that day. He also shared that he was from Kazumi City, and that their group had always wanted to protect the city at all costs. They had been together since childhood, and Gatu was furious that things had ended this way. However, that also became his motivation to get stronger, and he promised that next time, he would be the one to save the city and Chika. Instead of admitting he was the one who saved Chika, Takeru feigned confusion, and Gatu immediately understood why. However, Gatu reminded Takeru that if he ever got into trouble, he could always count on him and the team. Before leaving, Gatu thanked Takeru because, without him, they would never have seen Chika again. After a few minutes, Takeru's parents also said their goodbyes as they needed to get back to work. Takeru reassured them that he would be fine, not to worry, and that he would go home and rest. On his way home, Takeru noticed that many people around him were being overly nice, expressing gratitude or concern, even if they didn't say it to him directly. Takeru felt it was wrong to accept everyone's concern, because he wasn't the true owner of this body. Moreover, he also felt a sense of unease. That's why, until the body's rightful owner returned, he would do his best to protect the people around him. Although he couldn't do much right now, Takeru hoped the summer break would come soon so he could do something about the situation. Surprisingly, some hunters overheard what he was saying. But instead of engaging with them, Takeru chose to ignore them. However, these two hunters were quite persistent. They introduced themselves as Yashio and Toi, members of the A-rank squad of Ouroboros, an S-rank guild. They were sent here on their leader's orders. Thinking about this, Takeru recalled Sakura mentioning a guild called Ouroboros, and that this group was looking into him. Although the guild was prominent throughout Japan, there were many bad rumors surrounding it. So, Takeru decided to follow Sakura's advice and try to stay away from them. But when the two of them showed him a photo implying that they would do anything just to have a conversation with him, Takeru realized that if he didn't cooperate, he might drag other people into trouble. In the end, he agreed to meet them at a restaurant. There, the two hunters presented some documents that confused Takeru. It turned out these were the conditions they were offering for this meeting. When Takeru looked over the terms Ouroboros was offering, they were truly tempting. They offered him an executive position with an annual salary of 50 million yen and many other benefits. In his heart, Takeru thought that if he had met these people from the start, he probably would have hated all hunters. But he felt lucky to have met Sakura first because he had no intention of joining this guild. Takeru quickly refused the offer, explaining that he didn't want to become a hunter. Yashio and To, though reluctant, decided to use force to make him agree. Takeru calmly reminded them that their actions were quite violent, but the two of them were still determined to attack. Although their weapons were very modern, Takeru's skills were by no means inferior. Even so, the two didn't give up, even declaring they would hold back so as not to kill him. However, Takeru had excellent reflexes, easily dodging all of their attacks. Yashio decided he had to find a way to stop Takeru's movements and trick him. But even when they attacked together, Takeru was still powerful, almost on the level of an Estherin hunter model. Using his guard card skill, Takeru effortlessly dodged every attack from Yashio and To, and though they relentlessly threw punches and kicks, they couldn't land a single hit on him. Eventually, both of them were completely exhausted. Deep down, Takeru realized these two didn't hesitate to use anti-monster skills in public, because they were that desperate to win. Yashio threatened Takeru, saying that if their powers didn't get the results they wanted, they would switch to taking hostages. But what surprised Takeru was that they had the wrong person. It turned out the one they'd been tracking all this time wasn't Takuro, but Araki. Nevertheless, things had already gone too far, and the situation had become much more complicated. As Yashio collapsed, someone called his phone, and out of curiosity, Takeru answered it. The man on the other end of the line was Yashio and To's boss, and he praised Takeru's incredible strength. He got straight to the point, wanting Takeru to join his team. However, if Takeru refused this offer, he would have no choice but to provide his identity to the Hunters Association. He didn't want to do that. After all, he wanted to make Takeru his secret weapon, and would let no one else know of his existence. Knowing that Takeru wouldn't agree, he immediately sent him a photograph. In the photo were Takeru's parents lying in hospital beds. Takeru panicked, worried about his parents' condition, but the boss calmly told him not to get too angry. He had simply given them a special poison. incurable by any medicine in the world. The only thing that could save Takeru's parents was if the leader gave him the antidote. But as expected, this would only happen if Takeru agreed to his conditions. In order to negotiate, the leader demanded Takeru come meet him alone, which Takeru completely understood. He knew that bringing backup would only complicate things further. After checking on the condition of his parents, who were now in the hospital, Takeru immediately headed to the leader's location. As soon as he arrived, Echidna, the man's assistant, led Takeru to the meeting room. Along the way, Echidna explained that these restaurants were used as their bases all across Japan. And the place Takeru had been to before was also one of them. Takeru thought the meeting would take place in a normal room, but that wasn't the case. As he entered an empty room, Hakun, another employee, announced that the leader was waiting for Takeru on the other side of what looked like a black hole. Without hesitation, Takeru stepped inside and was greeted by a horde of monsters. These creatures were all under the leader's control, and whatever he commanded, they would surely obey. At this moment, Takeru finally realized that all the evil that had happened in the city over the past few days was the work of this leader. Surprisingly, the man didn't deny it. On the contrary, he casually admitted it was just an experiment. Furthermore, he laughed about how Gatu had been crying constantly after the incident, and because of that, he just couldn't stop doing it over and over again. Takeru's blood began to boil, and a mix of anger and confusion started to rise within him. Takeru asked directly if everything this leader had done was his goal from the very beginning. Without a shred of hesitation, the leader confirmed that he did it all to shatter the current rules, along with the guilds and the hunters who followed them. His goal was to take them down once and for all, and then he would rule the country with his monsters. Takeru thought this was impossible because no matter how many monsters were brought into the situation, things would still be brought under control. However, for the leader, it was a different story. It seemed he had calculated all the consequences. Even with the intervention of S-rank hunters, he still had other secret cards up his sleeve. Unexpectedly, the leader suddenly handed Takeru the antidote, leaving him in shock. He said he had planned to give it to Takeru after showing him the situation, as he had no intention of making an enemy of him. However, Takeru didn't trust that, especially after the leader had kidnapped his parents. Instead of discussing the matter, the leader continued, expressing that he understood Takeru's feelings about having to hide his power. He claimed it was unfair that people like Takeru had to live in suppression for years, constantly imposed upon and controlled by the public. He asked Takeru why he had to hold back this power, believing that Takeru truly wanted to use it freely. The leader wanted to lend him a hand, to conquer the world together with their strength. Without hesitation, Takeru threw the antidote to the ground and forcefully declared that he refused the leader's offer. As it turned out, Takeru had already discovered that the poison the leader used was basilisk venom, and he had already cured his parents himself. This astonished the leader, as this poison had never appeared in this world before, and he couldn't understand how Takeru knew of its existence. Takeru bluntly demanded the leader face him directly, as he had come here with the sole purpose of taking him down. Takeru believed his power existed only to protect these peaceful days. And if anyone dared to touch the things he held dear, he wouldn't hesitate to crush them. This excited the leader because he knew he was also very strong, and he didn't hesitate to charge into battle. Using his power, the leader commanded the monsters to attack Takeru all at once. With Flare Burst, Takeru incinerated them all in a single blow. But this didn't stop the leader. Instead, he became even more determined, hoping to exhaust Takeru's power. He continued to show off his monster summoning skills and force them to obey with magic. Takeru quickly realized that this was no ordinary person, but likely an S-rank hunter, so he couldn't hold back. Takeru continuously unleashed powerful attacks, forcing the leader to admit that Takeru was truly a talented anomaly. His attacks were even flashier than most. Realizing Takeru was a tough opponent, the leader called his assistant, Echidna, to deploy their secret weapon. At Echidna's signal, the leader summoned the terrifying monster he had been hiding. Hydra, an 8-headed monster. Takeru was a bit overwhelmed, as this was the first time he had ever seen such a monster and found it hard to believe that such a thing could exist in this world. When Takeru attacked the Hydra, the monster showed no signs of pain, making him think it was immune to it. But as he continued his assault, Takeru realized that each of the Hydra's heads felt pain individually. However, the most challenging part was that the Hydra could regenerate. As an immortal monster, no hunter could easily defeat it. Even so, Takeru didn't believe in immortality, as he had faced similar foes before. everything would be fine because he would definitely find a way to turn this difficult situation around. From his observations, Takeru realized that for every injured part, the monster would regenerate that spot. So, if he attacked the monster's entire body at once, he could defeat it. However, the Hydra was smarter than Takeru thought, and it was trying to stop him from gathering mana for his final blow. Takeru found the Hydra's attempts to block his mana gathering to be a nuisance. So to win, he needed to pay attention to every detail. After severing the Hydra's heads, Takeru tried to freeze them and discovered it took about 3 seconds for them to regenerate. Takeru planned to launch a rapid magic attack within this brief window. However, he felt that still wasn't enough, so he continued to search for more of the monster's weaknesses. After a few seconds, Takeru discovered the Hydra's weak spot was its tail. Using his power, he attacked and defeated the Hydra in a single blow. The leader couldn't believe his trump card had been defeated right before his eyes, but that didn't mean he was giving up. Although he tried to counterattack by summoning other deadly monsters, Takeru was stronger and continued to defeat them. He kept summoning other monsters to attack Takeru, but they all met the same fate, being destroyed at Takeru's hands. While the leader was struggling, Echidna decided to join the battle. At first, Takeru thought Echidna was just an ordinary monster that he could easily defeat. But he quickly discovered the truth. Echidna was a demon, far more powerful than he had imagined. The fact that Takeru knew about demons astonished Echidna, as she never expected someone from this world to know of their existence. This even made Echidna begin to believe that Takeru might be the one mentioned in the prophecy. Meanwhile, Takeru remained unfazed as he remembered his days in the other world, where he was always told to kill demons at all costs. Seeing Takeru in this calm state terrified Echidna, as if she were facing the Demon King himself. Echidna began to wonder what she should do next. Suddenly, the leader allowed her to do whatever she wanted, as he had already lost everything. All the monsters, including the Hydra, were dead, and he had no mana left. The leader figured it was better to leave things in Echidna's hands. This left her with no choice but to carry out her plan, the one she had intended to execute after eliminating all the hunters. Hearing this, the leader was a bit surprised, as it meant Echidna had also intended to overthrow him. But there was little he could do now, other than try to stop Takeru's movements to buy time for Echidna to carry out her plan. Meanwhile, Echidna began to put her plan into motion. Because a spatial wall separated the two worlds, a small hole like a gate couldn't cause much damage. But what would happen if this spatial wall was shattered? For this very reason, Echidna had created her child, whom she called Typhos, a creature she believed could even kill the gods. While all this was happening, a sudden rift appeared, connecting the two worlds. People living their normal lives began to panic as gates suddenly started appearing everywhere. Echidna also felt a change within herself, and it was only a matter of time to see whether things would go according to her plan, or if Takeru would win this fight. As Echidna began her rampage, Takeru had to prepare to face her, because Echidna was no easy opponent. But before we dive deep into this battle, we need to go back to where it all began. 10 years ago, when Boss Hebikawa was just 13 years old, and for the first time, stepped into a gate. Even though carrying everyone's bags was heavy, Hebikawa kept his spirits up, because he knew his seniors were taking good care of him. At least that's what he thought until the tables turned. When they were chased by a monster, his seniors abandoned him, saying only, "Since you entered a gate at such a young age, you must be strong enough to fend for yourself." At that moment, the boy thought it was the end for him, but things didn't end the way he expected. Echidna, the demon that had been chasing them, was astonished to see Hebikawa left behind. She decided to save him, but on the condition of a secret deal just between the two of them. After that horrifying event when he finally returned to the hospital, Hebikawa poured out all his fear and exhaustion, asking his teammates why they used him as bait. What was worse was that they wouldn't be punished. His teammates gave the organization an excuse, claiming it wasn't intentional, just an accident. When one of their team members died, the others started to make Hebikawa feel guilty for speaking up. Since his testimony couldn't be confirmed, nothing more could be done. These were the rules of the association. In the end, Hebikawa accepted the deal with Echidna. Hebikawa was determined to destroy the Hunters Association, as long as Echidna granted him power. He promised to pour all his strength into ensuring victory. By this point, when he and Echidna were halfway through their plan, Hebikawa felt a sense of relief until he realized that Takeru was still alive and well. But that didn't mean Takeru wasn't having a hard time. In fact, he couldn't deny that Echidna was incredibly powerful, and it seemed no power could affect her. knowing he needed to find Echidna's weakness to have a chance at winning. Takeru had to dodge every attack as best he could. While fighting, Echidna revealed that she and her child Typhos had merged, becoming the most powerful being in existence. She was confident that no one could ignore her. Takeru noticed his body was running out of strength, and if he didn't end the fight soon, he might be defeated. However, this didn't make Takeru give up. Even though Echidna believed none of his attacks could harm her, Takeru used aerial burst to slice off her head in a single blow. Takeru had discovered Echidna's weakness. Because she was controlling the Hydra monster, dealing with her became easier. However, Echidna refused to yield. Her mind began to erode and she could no longer control Typhus's power. In her desperation, she threatened Takeru, declaring she would hunt down his family and everyone he loved. Echidna's threat was a last-ditch effort to turn the tables, but Takeru knew this fight was drawing to a close. Takeru didn't want anyone, especially his family, to be dragged into this mess. He just glared at Echidna with rage in his eyes. This made Echidna suddenly feel a fear she thought she would never experience again. She began to wonder if she had such immense power, why was she still afraid of a child like Takeru? This fear reminded her of the painful days when her family despised and looked down on her. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but Echidna tried to control herself, knowing this weakness existed only in her mind. She had been weak in the past, but things were different now. She wanted revenge on everyone who had mocked her. She wanted them to feel despair. To do that, she had to kill Takeru, who she believed was the figure from the prophecy everyone was searching for, even if it cost her own life. Meanwhile, Takeru also began to recall moments from when he lived in the other world. Once, he and Edelweiss were resting in a forest, and Edelweiss excitedly told him that many people were joining the journey this time, which made her believe the trip would be amazing. However, Edelweiss still wondered if refusing the offer to join another group to defeat the Demon King immediately was the right decision, even though everyone had asked them to join. Takeru went on to say that anyone had the right to refuse, as the mission was extremely dangerous. He also thought that no one would be able to keep up with his pace. Edelweiss completely agreed. If her memory served her right, there was a time Takeru had abandoned his horse and suddenly started running on foot, and another time he decided to climb a cliff. So no one could possibly keep up with him. Besides, Edelweiss knew that Takeru didn't trust everyone, even when they praised his strength. Takeru seemed more comfortable being alone. However, despite his denials, Takeru truly cherished having Edelweiss by his side, as she always took care of him when things didn't go as planned. Thanks to Edelweiss, Takeru's wounds were always treated promptly. That's why no matter what happened, Takeru wouldn't let the current events hold him back. Although he had only discovered a small part of Typhos, that didn't mean he would give up. Now that Takeru knew the true location of Echidna's body, all that was left was to destroy her with all his might. However, his body was gradually losing energy, and Takeru knew he was running out of time. He needed to end this fight quickly before he collapsed from exhaustion. Takeru started to feel his body growing sluggish, and Echidna quickly noticed. Although Takeru knew that dealing with Echidna could be simple, his body had reached its limit, and he couldn't continuously use powerful spells like before. However, this didn't worry him, because he knew that Typhus was also draining Echidna's life force, making her condition just as bad. Takeru realized something important. Typhus wasn't just draining Echidna's life force, but also that of the people in this world. Typhus's followers had overrun Japan, and no matter what Takeru did, everything might end in death and destruction. But instead of giving up, Takeru thought that if that was true, he needed to get back to the other world quickly. However, one question troubled him. Would he even have enough strength to move after killing Echidna? At this point, Takeru didn't know what to do anymore. Echidna was also aware that if Takeru killed her, Typhos would lose all control. Perhaps this was why she believed Takeru wouldn't kill her. But she was wrong. Takeru showed no signs of giving up. His determination to fight remained unshaken. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Japan, Typhus's followers had begun to cause chaos. Takeru knew that time was running out, and his decision could determine the fate of both worlds, while the guilds were doing their best to control the situation. Gatu and his comrades were trying to stay optimistic amidst the difficulty, to avoid causing a panic among the people. The hunters from Uran Academy also joined the fight, continuously chanting Sakura's name, showing their pride in their role model. They declared that they existed to protect peace and the people from vicious monsters. Bayuduin was confident until a monster caught him, sending his teammates into a panic. Fortunately, Sakura arrived just in time before things could get any worse. Even though Byuduan looked like an S-rank hunter, he knew that S-rank was still a distant dream. Meanwhile, Sakura seemed to be moving from one place to another, making sure everything was under control. After finishing her mission in the downtown area, she moved on to the next location. People couldn't believe that Sakura possessed such immense power. In Sakura's mind, nothing could stop her, and she would defeat anything that came near. Elsewhere, Takeru was also fighting with all his might to avoid defeat. Even Echidna was surprised by his strength as her army was destroyed bit by bit. In the midst of this intense battle, Takeru suddenly remembered something Edelweiss had once asked him. It turned out the reason he couldn't trust his former comrades was because he was aware that his own power far surpassed theirs, which made him distance himself before they had the chance to do it first. Takeru had learned his lesson from the past and shared this with Hebikawa. He explained that most people wouldn't become strong, but if you looked around the right way, you'd find those who weren't like that. Takeru was grateful to have people like Edelweiss and Hebikawa who helped him realize he didn't have to fight alone. As things began to slip out of Echidna's control, she decided to sacrifice herself to end it all. However, no matter how she sacrificed herself, Takeru would always win. He had grasped the entire situation, something Echidna hadn't expected. The spatial wall suddenly vanished, and Echidna was stunned to realize that not only had Typhus been killed, but its entire existence had been erased. She understood that Takeru's power was far beyond human capability. As Takeru advanced toward Echidna, she couldn't help but feel terrified. It seemed Takeru wanted to ask her something before finishing her off. Immediately, he asked about the prophecy she had mentioned. Echidna, struggling to respond, tried to explain that the prophecy was related to a power similar to Takeru's. But before she could say more, her wounds stopped regenerating, signaling that she was slowly dying. This sight pained Hebikawa, because after all these years they had been close partners, and letting go of a relationship like that was anything but easy. In that moment, Hebikawa recalled the good and difficult times he had been through with Echidna. It felt like a punishment for him to witness her passing. But instead of showing her suffering, Echidna tried to keep a cheerful expression so Hebikawa wouldn't feel too burdened. Even so, Hebikawa's heart was broken and he could no longer control his anger. He was determined to kill Takeru at all costs. However, before Hebikawa could make his move, a group of strangers appeared, shocking Takeru. He never expected anyone else to show up. With a calm tone, Takeru asked who they were. Without hesitation, the three introduced themselves as Ryer, Sukuna, and Dark Knight. Just by a quick glance, Takeru knew these people were strong because they didn't flinch at his presence. He was also aware that if he kept fighting, his body wouldn't be able to take it anymore. The three quickly assured Takeru they meant no harm and that he didn't need to be so wary. They explained their only purpose was to deal with the traitor, Echidna, and they had no intention of fighting Takeru. They also said they came to retrieve something they called a trade secret. Once they had what they needed, they immediately prepared to leave. However, Takeru wasn't about to let them leave so easily. Ryer, one of the three, advised Takeru to relax, knowing he was exhausted. He reassured him that they would surely meet again in the near future, so there was no need to rush. This made Takeru wonder if this was the other world he once knew, but he also realized it wasn't. Meanwhile, in the city, many people had died, and the damage from this outbreak was unprecedented. The person behind the incident was quickly apprehended by the Hunters Association, and everyone seemed to be at ease. However, Hebikawa didn't resist at all, perhaps because he finally felt guilty for what he had done. On the way to the police station, Hebikawa quietly reflected on what Takeru had told him earlier. In his mind, he looked back at the association and realized they had never truly been on the side of justice. He believed he didn't have much time left. But then, Hebikawa's comrades came to rescue him. A bomb from one of Hebikawa's men hit the police car, and they quickly reached their leader in a matter of seconds. Before attacking, Hebikawa reminded everyone that only those willing to die should follow, because they were going to end it all this time. Meanwhile, at Kazami Hospital, Takeru's parents had recovered and were preparing to go home. Outside the hospital, Takeru felt the heat of the sun, signaling that summer vacation was approaching. Elsewhere, the three demons had just returned home and immediately reported to the princess that they had dealt with the traitor, Echidna, as she had ordered. In addition, they had also retrieved the stolen item, Pandora, but that wasn't the most interesting part. Maria announced that they had spared someone they believed to be the figure from the Messiah's prophecy. The princess seemed pleased with this decision, as she believed the time was not yet right. Sukuna, on the other hand, was furious, as she desperately wanted to face Takeru. However, since the situation was still not safe for them, they decided to leave Takeru alone for the time being. Meanwhile, at the Japan Hunters Association headquarters, the leaders were meeting to discuss recent events. S-rank hunter, Sogo Renya, announced that he had summoned all 50 S-rank hunters for an emergency meeting, but only 5 showed up, much to his surprise. He wondered if the remaining hunters even cared about the fate of Japan, with everything spiraling out of control. Sakura reminded him that since those present had answered the summons, there was no need to mention the others. Karen agreed, saying that gathering everyone on site was outdated in this day and age. The association's leader immediately countered, pointing out that because they had to discuss confidential matters, gathering in person was necessary. Instead of agreeing, Karen even teased the leader, making Sogo even angrier. Since the Hunters Association is run by the government, using tax money to go to fancy inns or hotels is unacceptable. It was certain that if the hunters used tax money for lavish luxuries, they would be fired immediately. However, to Karen, no matter what the government said, it was the hunters who were protecting the people. This didn't sit well with Sogo at all, as he sided with the government. Meanwhile, some of the other hunters tried to ease the tense atmosphere. S-rank hunter Igarashi Hideo teased hunter Hayabusa Tenku by pairing him up with Karen, causing Tenku to blush as he never expected to be put in such an awkward situation. However, it seemed Tenku wasn't Karen's type. A kind man willing to do anything for others, even the weak, was not her ideal. Hearing this made Tenku feel dejected, as he had basically been rejected without even confessing. Noticing Tenku was down, Hideo tried to comfort him, saying that his destined partner was surely waiting for him somewhere. Just as things were getting chaotic, Akahoshi Mayoi, the chairman of the Hunters Association, appeared, causing everyone's attitude to shift abruptly. This took Sogo by surprise, and the meeting immediately kicked off. The first matter they discussed was the terrorist attack led by Hebikawa. The chairman announced that through their investigation, they had confirmed the involvement of demons in the incident. This information confused the hunters, as they had never heard of demons before. The chairman went on to explain that demons are beings that exist outside the gates, who could be called people from another world. Some hunters like Tenku already knew there were signs of civilization inside the gates, but he began to wonder, weren't all of those just ruins? However, Hideo argued that it made sense they didn't know about this, since these demons had only appeared once over 20 years ago. They had managed to defeat him, and he never appeared again. To be more precise, demons only look like humans. They are actually ruthless monsters. Based on what Hideo said, establishing relations with demons would be impossible. However, if they announced this to the public, there would be people who wouldn't agree with them. Besides, there would also be those who would try to meet these demons. Since they couldn't predict how things would turn out, they had planned to hide the existence of demons until now, and that's why the truth would only be revealed to S-rank hunters, and a system would be established. That's also why they needed to participate in this cover-up as much as possible. Hearing all of this made Sakura wonder if her mother and father were killed by a demon, and not a humanoid monster. Just as she was about to ask more about it, the chairman moved on to the next topic. Takaru's picture appeared on the large screen, sending a chill down Sakura's spine. She never expected the association already knew, but it seemed the chairman had his ways. According to the chairman, Takeru had single-handedly destroyed the Ouroboros Guild. This puzzled Tenku because according to the reports they received, Hebikawa had been captured by the association's hunters. So how could Takaru have defeated them all by himself? One of the officers explained that when they arrived on the scene, Hebikawa was already taken down. They checked the security cameras and found Takaru. Since he doesn't belong to the Hunters Association, they were investigating who he was. The chairman requested that if anyone had any information on Takaru, they should gather it. However, throughout the meeting, no one shared any information, which made the chairman smile unexpectedly. It turned out the chairman had only summoned 4 people, not the entire organization, and Sogo was an accomplice in this plan. Therefore, he asked Sogo to keep it a secret, as there were still other plans in motion. Now, it was only a matter of time before they found out if the chairman was hiding something, and if so, what it was. Meanwhile, Sakura was completely bewildered. She never expected Takeru's name to come up in such a major event. No matter how hard she tried to keep things under wraps, it seemed nothing was working. Even though she was doing so much for Takeru, it seemed Takeru himself was just too careless. At this point, Sakura was genuinely confused about whether Takeru even wanted to stay hidden. Still, she believed Takeru had his reasons, and so she decided to talk to him about it. Without hesitation, she immediately sent Takeru a message, telling him to contact her when he saw it. Suddenly, the chairman walked in, reassuring Sakura that there was no need to worry. The chairman apparently already knew the truth, that the Ouroboros incident was because they had poisoned Takeru's parents. Therefore, the Hunters Association had no plans to do anything to Takeru. However, for now, the chairman wanted Sogo and the others to resolve the issue as soon as possible, and only wanted Sakura to know about this, since she was Takeru's friend. Hearing this, Sakura was completely shocked, as she never expected the chairman to know so much. Instead of wondering how he knew all this, Sakura began to question if she was really Takeru's friend, because from her perspective, they weren't that close at all. Just as the chairman left, a cute-looking girl named Momiji appeared and announced that their grandfather was waiting. Suddenly, Momiji burst into tears because this was the first time Sakura's work had settled down, allowing them to spend time together after so long. To make it up to Momiji, Sakura promised she would do anything Momiji wanted, no matter what. Hearing that, Momiji became overjoyed and immediately showed Sakura what she wanted, much to Sakura's surprise. The next day, Takeru decided to go to the shopping center because he needed to buy a few things. When he arrived, he was shocked to see how crowded it was, but it wasn't entirely unexpected since summer vacation had started. Even though he didn't want to go, Takeru had to, as there were many things he needed to buy. Although it had only been a week since the incident, the government had quickly restored the buildings, which made Takeru guess it was probably thanks to the Specialized Restoration Bureau under the Hunters Association. But instead of worrying about that right now, he was just happy he could finally buy a new phone, since his old one got destroyed during the fight with Typhos. While on his way home, Takeru happened to run into Momiji and Sakura. It seemed the two sisters were out shopping as well. Although Takeru greeted Sakura with a bright smile, she didn't seem happy, thinking about how Takeru hadn't replied to her message from the day before. Sakura's angry face was plain to see, which started to scare Takeru a little. Without hesitating, he explained everything to her, from how his phone was broken to the fact that he had just bought a new one. Meanwhile, Momiji was just observing her sister. Based on what she remembered her grandmother saying, Momiji couldn't help but think that Sakura might be in love with Takeru, seeing how angry her sister got when he ignored her. Without hesitation, Momiji directly asked Sakura if Takeru was her boyfriend. At first, Sakura was a little embarrassed to hear this. But since she'd been wondering since yesterday if Takeru even considered her a friend, she decided to go along with Momoji's words, confirming that they were indeed friends. Sakura thought Takeru would be embarrassed to hear this. But to her surprise, he seemed happy and even honored to be friends with the most popular person in school. Since Momiji wanted to know more about Sakura's life at school, she invited Takeru to go shopping with them. Although both of them were surprised, Takeru didn't refuse and accepted Momiji's invitation. In the end, the three of them spent the whole day shopping. While the Wingard team was having lunch at a restaurant, they were surprised to see Takeru with Sakura and Momiji. Seeing Takeru and Sakura together shocked them, and they started to think that maybe Takeru and Sakura were dating. While some members of the group were amused by the sight, their leader looked quite serious, back with Takeru and Sakura, as something was still bothering her from earlier. Momiji had gone to ride the carousel. Sakura, sensing something wasn't right, told Takeru he shouldn't lie about her being liked by everyone at school. Although he was a little scared to talk back to Sakura, Takeru frankly replied that it wasn't exactly a lie. Hearing that, Sakura realized Takeru wasn't a bad person, no matter what anyone else said. She knew he only fought for his parents' safety. Even though the chairman said he was investigating Takeru, Sakura felt as if he had known him even before the incident. She began to wonder why that was. And questions like, who is Takeru really? Or, does he have amnesia? Began to surface in Sakura's mind. Even though they said they were friends, she still felt she didn't know much about him. Their serious conversation was interrupted when the ride Momiji was on suddenly stopped, and she disappeared. Immediately, the two of them grew worried and started searching for her. But what they didn't know was that from Momiji's perspective, she was hiding on purpose to give Takeru and Sakura some time to confess to each other. While hiding, Momiji suddenly saw a little boy crying because he had lost his parents. Without hesitating, she went over and told the little boy she would help him find his parents. Not long after, a gate break suddenly appeared and panic erupted everywhere. Momiji quickly grabbed the boy's hand, and they fled as fast as they could. Meanwhile, Takeru and Sakura were more worried than ever, unable to find Momiji. As they searched for her, the people in the park were relieved to see Sakura, because now there was hope of being saved. Without hesitation, they asked Sakura to handle the situation quickly. But because she couldn't find her little sister, Sakura couldn't focus and seemed unable to speak at that moment. Takeru immediately spoke up for her. He asked the crowd if anyone had seen Sakura's little sister, describing her in detail. Momiji is a 5-year-old girl, wearing a dress just like her sister's and a ribbon in her hair. Based on this description, some people remembered having seen her. Upon hearing this, Sakura instantly knew her sister had headed towards the gate break. Without wasting a moment, she immediately ran over there to check on the situation. Meanwhile, Momiji was trying her best to stay calm, knowing that the little boy beside her was terrified. In her mind, Momiji reassured the boy that there was nothing to worry about, because her big sister, Sakura, would surely take care of everything. But the situation was far more difficult than Momiji had anticipated, as a monster was advancing towards them, ready to kill them both. As for Sakura, she was running towards Momoji's location, remembering the time their parents had sacrificed themselves to save them. This gave her more motivation, because she knew that if she lost Momiji, she would never be able to forgive herself. Just then, they both spotted Momiji in an alley, with the monster preparing to attack her. Before it could do anything, Takeru rushed in and defeated it in a single blow. After resolving everything and saving everyone, Takeru and Sakura's difficult day came to an end. Additionally, Sakura found the lost boy's parents, much to everyone's delight. Before they parted ways, Sakura apologized to Takeru for losing her composure, even though she's a hunter, which forced him to use his powers. Takeru, though a bit shy, reassured her not to worry about it, saying that since she was always looking out for him, it was about time he did something to help her. Hearing this, Sakura felt a bit more relieved. Meanwhile, Momiji also thanked Takeru for his help, saying she might have died if it weren't for him. Takeru took the opportunity to remind Momiji not to wander off on her own again, because it would only make Sakura worry. However, Takeru couldn't deny that it was amazing to see Momiji protect him without flinching. Hearing that, Momiji was overjoyed, as this was the first time she'd ever been praised. Meanwhile, Sakura was still lost in thought, wondering how Takeru knew those combat moves, which were something only people who had been through many battles would know. Without hesitating, she asked him directly who he was, because she didn't want to have any more doubts and wanted to know the truth right now. Feeling a little guilty for not being clear about himself, Takeru prepared to tell Sakura everything. However, before he could do that, Momiji interrupted their conversation, asking them both to make up. Having watched a lot of TV dramas, Momiji suggested that to make up they should kiss, just like actors often do. This innocent suggestion made Sakura burst out laughing. After a long day, Sakura asked Takeru if he wanted to walk home with them, and without hesitation, Takeru agreed. On the way home, Takeru realized that Sakura and Momiji were very close, which made him a bit envious. However, Sakura felt that because of this, she spoiled Momiji a lot, but that didn't bother her at all, since Momiji was her only treasure right now. No matter what happened, she would make sure her little sister had the best life possible. Sakura also shared that their parents were killed when Momiji was very young, so she doesn't really know what a parent's love feels like. Since Sakura was very weak as a child, Momiji grew up lonely, which makes Sakura feel regretful. That's why Sakura decided to become strong and become a hunter, for a very personal reason. In her mind, if she was strong, she could protect the people she loves, so that Momiji wouldn't have to cry anymore. But it wasn't just that. She also hoped it would lead to a world where everyone could laugh freely. Although she knew it might seem like a pipe dream for her, it wasn't just a passing thought. In addition, Takeru also decided to tell Sakura something he thought he might not get another chance to say. With a bright smile, he expressed how happy he was to have met her, because she had let him experience things beyond his imagination. He also shared that his memories might be slowly coming back, and that it was possible the memories he had made in this short time might disappear. This left Sakura confused, as none of it made any sense. Takeru went on to explain that it was because he wasn't the real Takeru. However, it seemed Sakura didn't quite understand what he meant. She simply said that even if he forgot her, she would still remember him as her friend. The next day, since Takeru planned to meet with Sugikikyu, he and Byuduan were now on their way to Niigata. But it seemed Takeru didn't like Byuduan's company at all. Meanwhile, at the sacred Yomotsudake Mountains, Uesugi appeared. As soon as they arrived at the village, the two of them immediately started climbing the mountain. And Takeru was quite surprised that his body felt light, even after climbing for hours on end. It seemed this forest had a dense amount of mana circulating through it, which Takeru noticed himself. According to Biuduan, these mountains were an ideal location to build a shelter, thanks to the advantage of that powerful energy source. Usually shrines because this place connects to another world without going through a gate. There have been stories of yokai like Oni appearing here at some point. All of this stems from the dragon veins that exist in places like this, so everything here shares the same origin. To put it bluntly, Biuduan said this place has all sorts of dangerous creatures, and only S-rank hunters and a few special clans know about it. However, there's nothing to worry about because if any monsters invade, there will be someone to take care of them. In Japan, exorcists are very common, but the Wasugi clan was one of the families that had protected the country since ancient times. However, Takeru wondered why Biuduan used the past tense when referring to them. It turns out the clan was wiped out 10 years ago by a monster that appeared in this area. That monster was sealed away by Wasugi Tsubaki, Kikyu's older sister, but she ultimately had to sacrifice her own life to do it. This means that the only survivor was none other than Kikyu, and she has been protecting this seal all this time. That's why her appearance in that magazine was such a rare moment. Now that Biuduan mentioned it, Takeru got the feeling that Kikyu gave off a calm vibe. However, Biuduan immediately disagreed, and as the two of them started to argue further, Kikyu suddenly appeared, hitting Biuduan for talking behind her back. This made Takeru see her in a different light, as she was tending to Biuduan and also showing concern for Takeru. Before starting their fight, she asked Takeru to show her his strength. To her surprise, Takeru was anything but ordinary. If he were just an average hunter, Kikyu's first attack would have been enough to finish him. Furthermore, she was also quite surprised to see that Takeru's counterattacks were very good, from the way he hardened his arm and waited for an opening to strike back. Kikyu was certain that Takeru was used to fighting, but she still thought he didn't stand a chance against her until she saw what Takeru could do. Before things went too far, Kikyu said that was enough, because if they continued, it would go beyond a simple test, as she had already seen Takeru's potential. Kikyu started asking Takeru some questions to understand more. Since Takeru wasn't a hunter, she wondered why he had come all this way just to see her. Without hesitation, Takeru said that he wanted her to help him exorcise a spirit that was possessing him. He went on to explain that he'd been in an accident that led to amnesia and might have given him the ability to use powers through possession. Therefore, he wanted to return to his normal self. Hearing this, Kikyu realized that Takeru was anything but normal, because Kikyu suspected that Takeru wouldn't lie. After he had arrived, she only asked to confirm. Did Takeru really want to get rid of the spirit inside him or not, since it seemed like he really wanted to? Kikyu had no choice but to invite him to her mansion so they could talk more. After a long day, Takeru felt a bit tired from the battle and the hospitality of Kikyu's family. To relax a little, he went to take a bath in the hot spring. Takeru suddenly sensed a presence, and to his surprise, it was none other than Kikyu. Fearing for his life, Takeru tried to stay as quiet as possible until he heard Kikyu talking to herself, wondering why she was so bad at communicating. It seemed what had happened between her and Takeru had left her flustered, so she told herself she had to try harder for the sake of the Wasugi clan. During those moments, Takeru glanced at her for a bit, wondering why Kikyu was so different than before. Thanks to a small movement, the S-rank hunter noticed his presence. Without hesitation, she immediately launched a deadly attack. But as soon as she saw it was just Takeru, she stopped immediately, her cheeks flushing red with embarrassment. The next day, Takeru expected her to be furious with him, but to his surprise, she didn't seem bothered by what had happened. In fact, she even greeted Takeru with a good morning, which left the boy so flustered that he stammered. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Kikyu bluntly asked Takeru if he was acting this way because of what happened yesterday. To avoid giving Kikyu the wrong idea, Takeru apologized, which made Kikyu chuckle a little as she was just teasing him. She also assured him that it was her fault, so there was nothing to worry about. Since it was a new day, it was now time for them to find out more about the spirit haunting Takeru. To investigate further, Kikyu asked Takeru to close his eyes and concentrate, listening to his own heartbeat. Surprisingly, Takeru did better than she expected. With this intense focus, it seemed like no sound could affect him. However, thinking about Takeru's story, Kikyu realized immediately that he had been lying from the start. As a member of the Wasugi clan who serve the gods, she has the ability to discern these things. His story felt illogical, yet it didn't seem like this child was lying at all. So, to get a clearer understanding, Kakyu needed to take a closer look inside his mind. As soon as she entered Takeru's mind, she couldn't deny that it looked calm and gentle, but she also felt a certain sadness. As she delved deeper, Kikyu was shocked by what she saw. So, the moment she left Takeru's mind, she knew instantly that with that kind of power, Takeru couldn't just be an ordinary citizen as he had claimed. Therefore, no matter what happened, she desperately needed to find out who Takeru really was. Meanwhile, Takeru was confused about what was happening, as it seemed Kikyu was actually trying to kill him. With no other choice, Takeru had to use a defensive measure to ensure he wouldn't be killed. Seeing Takeru make his move, Kikyu concluded that he was indeed the strongest hunter she had ever met. When things went too far, Takeru had no choice but to counterattack, as he couldn't hold back any longer. As she was being swept away by Takeru's power, Kikyu suddenly stopped resisting. Unexpectedly, her ribbon had been lost during the fight. Since it was a gift from her family, she couldn't afford to lose it at any cost. Now that it was gone, all she could do was sob uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Takeru was confused, wondering if it was his fault. So Takeru did everything he could to try and calm her down, but it seemed like nothing was working. Meanwhile, somewhere near the seal, it looked like something terrible was about to happen. 10 years ago, when the Wasugi family was still alive, they reminded themselves that since their family had risked their lives to pave the way, they couldn't let that effort go to waste. This was the time they needed to act for the good of everyone, no matter how difficult things got. The family seemed quite calm, knowing that Wasugi Tsubaki, the head of the family, was always there to protect them. They respected her with all their hearts, especially Kaikyu, who was still so young back then. Tsubaki was known as a caring older sister who would do anything for Kikyu. So, on the last day they saw each other, Tsubaki held Kikyu in a tight embrace, reassuring her that no matter what happened, Kikyu could always rely on her. Tsubaki also said that although Kikyu was a bit clumsy with her words, she was still proud that Kikyu was able to express her feelings. Tsubaki also thanked her for always worrying about them, and promised she wouldn't die so easily. She promised Kikyu that she wouldn't die until she saw her sister in a wedding dress. But it seems that's all changed now that Tsubaki is dead. All Kikyu has left are the memories they shared. Kikyu describes her sister as the light of the family, someone everyone naturally gathered around. As for Kikyu, she was just a shut-in. But with Tsubaki by her side, it gave Kikyu courage. However, on that day, the members of the Wasugi family left to seal a rampaging monster and never returned home. It's true that Yomotsudake is a harsh place for ordinary people without protection, so the servants had to descend the mountain, and Kikyu still clearly remembers their dejected faces as they abandoned her. Those who remained began to look at her with eyes that said it would have been better if she had died instead of her sister. There was even a suggestion for all of them to go down the mountain together, but she couldn't say, "Don't go," or "Stay here," because she didn't have the strength to protect everyone. As the last member of the Wasugi clan, it was Kikyu's responsibility to protect the seal that everyone had sacrificed their lives to create. But whether she could actually do it made her anxious. There was a time she thought that if she just became like her sister, everything would be fine. So she tried to act just like Tsubaki. That's why with the hair ribbon on her head, she thought she could live cheerfully all the time. Now that it's gone, she can't help but feel anxious, as if she can't face it alone, and she hates herself for feeling that way. Seeing Kikyu upset, Takeru comforted her by saying he completely understood that feeling, because he used to be the same way. He was constantly bullied and wanted to change his life, but the thought of having to be someone else every day felt suffocating. However, Kikyu couldn't seem to believe this, since Takeru looked so strong, so she asked him how he managed to change and become the person he is now. With a bright smile, Takeru revealed his secret. It was because he had people around him who accepted him for who he was. No matter what, we always meet amazing people when we least expect it. After that short morning conversation, Byuduan noticed that Takeru was full of energy. Since he had finished repairing the dojo roof, they could start training anytime. But before anything else, Takeru tried to call out Byuduan for deliberately provoking Kikyu the day before. Byuduan's reason took Takeru a bit by surprise. It seems Byuduan did it on purpose because he knew Kikyu was a rather lonely person, so she needed someone she could easily pick a fight with. He was willing to be that person. Takeru didn't expect to hear this from him, but now he felt a little guilty about what had happened and planned to do something to make Kikyu feel better. However, there was no denying that finding a hair ribbon wasn't going to be easy. Eventually, Kikyu appeared, informing Takeru that when she entered his mind, she had fought against some kind of evil presence inside him. So, Takeru took the opportunity to ask Kikyu if she had seen another soul in there. Surprisingly, it seemed there was no other soul at all. Kikyu also thought that it was impossible for two souls to exist in one body, but this didn't make any sense since it was known that Kikyu fought by letting a spirit possess her. However, it seems that wasn't the case for Kikyu, as she only borrows their power, so the technique isn't possession. In a case where a spirit enters a body that already has another soul, the original soul would be pushed out. This made Takeru wonder where the original host's soul had gone. Suddenly a fox appeared, seeming to want Takeru to follow it. To his surprise, the fox found the very hair ribbon he was looking for. What's more, it seemed the fox could also talk to Takeru. Since this wasn't the first time Takeru had spoken with an animal, he asked the fox what it wanted him to do, without any hesitation. The fox said it wanted Takeru to protect Kikyu at all costs. This confused Takeru, as he knew that even without asking for help, Kikyu was already quite strong. But remembering what Byuduan had told him earlier, Takeru decided to accept the fox's request. However, before anything else, it also reminded Takeru to keep this a secret, as it might shock Kikyu a little. Now that everything was settled, Takeru used a teleportation spell and returned to where Kikyu was. He immediately handed the hair ribbon back to her, and this brought a few tears to Kikyu's eyes. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Tsubaki was feeling happy, knowing that Kikyu was no longer alone. Unexpectedly, it seems she was actually the fox from before. Although protecting her younger sister was once her duty, that was no longer possible. And that's why everything was now in Takeru's hands. If you make her cry, I swear, I'll come for you without a moment's hesitation. Since Kikyo clearly couldn't help him with this, Takeru decided to head home. However, he promised Kikyo he would text her if there were any new developments. Before he left, Kikyo reminded him that even if an evil spirit were to possess him, it would only be a matter of time, before his body would start trying to push out the foreign entity, as one spirit cannot continue to overpower another for long. Therefore, Kikyo concluded that Takeru wasn't the one who needed an exorcism. On his way back down the mountain, he started thinking about what Kikyo had told him. According to her, it was strange that Takeru's soul still hadn't returned. Had it gone somewhere else, or had it been destroyed? Whatever the case, it seemed they were back at square one. Now he needed to figure out what to do next. Suddenly the ground began to shake, throwing both Takeru and Byuduan, who was at the mansion, into a panic. Surprisingly, Kikyo remained perfectly calm. She even told Byuduan to get down the mountain as soon as possible, but since he insisted on staying to help, Kikyo had no choice but to knock him down. Although she appreciated his concern, Kikyo thought Byuduan would only get in the way. Besides, this was a duty of the Wasugi family, so she had to be the one to handle it. After some time, Byuduan came to after being knocked down by Kikyo. He begged Anira, Kikyo's guardian spirit which had been gifted to her by her older sister, to return to Kikyo's side. But it seemed Anira had no intention of doing so, since it was all on Kikyo's orders. On their way, they happened to run into Takeru. Seeing he was covered in wounds, Takeru immediately started bandaging him up. Meanwhile, Byuduan seemed a bit shocked by the chaotic scene before him. However, this was no time to worry about that, because Takeru was here now. He demanded that Byuduan take him back to Kikyo no matter what, but it seemed there was nothing Byuduan could do, as Anira had already decided to take him to safety. Meanwhile, Takeru started to recall what the fox had asked of him. Hearing that Kikyo was in trouble, Takeru wondered if he should go back to the mansion right now and help her himself. The fox suddenly appeared. Seeing that Takeru needed a guide, she had come to help. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, Kikyo was waiting with a bewitching smile. Tsubaki welcomed her younger sister, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. She began to praise Kikyo's hair, saying it looked exactly like the style she herself had created before. But surprisingly, the Tsubaki standing here was not the person Kikyo once knew. This Tsubaki even teased Kikyo, saying her little sister had always lacked confidence. She also remarked that Kikyo had been lonely for a very long time, but that she needn't worry anymore because from this day on, they would all be together. However, Kikyo refused. Drawing her sword, she began to chant a spell. Seeing this, Tsubaki grew furious, now certain that Kikyo had no intention of accepting her. Tsubaki felt she had no choice but to wipe that arrogant look off Kikyo's face. She warned that no matter how much Kikyo cried, she wouldn't stop. This didn't frighten Kikyo, however. She was a true Wasugi, one who would destroy defiant gods. She was the incarnation of Bishamon and would see to it that this demon was annihilated. The moment he heard Kikyo was in danger, Takeru immediately started running towards her location. Along the way, the fox started to get tired. Takaru was running faster than her, even though she was supposed to be his guide. She pleaded with Takaru to stop, otherwise she'd be completely useless. Besides, she was certain he had no idea where he was going. Hearing this, Takaru stopped, reasoning that he thought heading in the direction of the Manosaurs would be fine. Without missing a beat, the fox said that was exactly why he was so boring. Before they went any further, Takaru took the chance to ask the fox about the monster that was running rampant. At its source, it was so powerful that it couldn't be just some simple monster. The fox explained that, to be specific, it wasn't really a monster, but Naraku. It's an entity that appeared in this world 1,000 years ago through the dragon veins. So basically, it's like a powerful demon. Hearing that it was a demon didn't surprise Takaru in the slightest, which made the fox wonder how he knew about them. Takaru explained that he didn't know much, only that they existed. With that, the fox explained that it's been passed down for generations in the Wasugi family that a spirit from a parallel world is summoned here. And to move around in this world, it needs an object called a Yorishiro. Naraku can interfere with the minds of any living creature. It used that power to make people believe it controlled the weather and the mountains. The people feared it as a mountain god, but her family used true divine power to seal it away. But for some reason, the seal was broken 10 years ago. According to the fox, it seems the seal had weakened over time and lost its power, so they had to seal it again. However, even though that put the Wasugi family in a tough spot, its power was just too great for them to handle. Hearing this, Takaru realized the fox was Kikyo's sister, Tsubaki. Tsubaki went on to explain that her body had been taken over by that demon, leaving her in spirit form. But she knew that the moment Takaru saw her, he would immediately realize who she was. It was because she didn't have a shadow. Still, Takaru started to wonder why she chose the form of a fox over other spirits. As unbelievable as it sounded, it seems Tsubaki chose this form because it looks cute from a human perspective, which made Takaru chuckle a bit. On top of that, Tsubaki explained that because the Wasugi bloodline holds divine power, her body was the perfect vessel for the demon. Kikyo, on the other hand, had the highest potential, making her a vessel for the most powerful god. That's why it's no surprise Naraku would target Kikyo to become a god once more. This reminded Takaru that demons are usually invincible. Even if you destroy their vessel, it doesn't harm the actual spirit since it's somewhere else. However, if an attack has divine power, the spirit itself gets hurt. But even with their power, all they could do was bind its spirit and seal it away. Kikyo was trying to end the battle in a single blow. If she could do that, there'd be a chance to win. Kikyo quickly unleashed her power to hold her ground. Even though Naraku recognized Kikyo's formidable power, she wouldn't submit so easily. Just as Kikyo was about to finish the fight, Naraku suddenly acted as if she were sad, reminding Kikyo of her sister. Those powerful emotions allowed Naraku to quickly possess Kikyo. Showing she had become an expert at exploiting her victim's mind, using Tsubaki's memories as a weapon. As the situation became worse than expected, Takaru suddenly appeared to save her. It was the first time Naraku had seen him, and she wondered who he was. But instead of introducing himself, Takaru immediately went to bandage Kikyo's wounds. Looking at her condition, it was clear she was losing a lot of blood and needed a doctor right away. But instead of worrying about herself, Kikyo kept apologizing for failing to destroy the monster, for not keeping her promise to everyone. While this emotional scene unfolded, Naraku couldn't believe that Takaru was actually ignoring her, after all the trouble he'd gone through to get here. She couldn't help but ask who he was. She moved closer, asking if he was Kikyo's boyfriend, or if he wanted to be her friend instead. But before she could finish, Takaru instantly punched her, sending her flying back several meters with ease. Instead of worrying about the monster, Takaru was worried that at the rate his magic worked, he wouldn't be able to heal Kikyo in time. Soon after, Tsubaki finally caught up. Seeing her sister in that state, she grew worried. To help her, even just a little, she decided to take back her hair tie, since it was a gift from her to her sister. Tsubaki planned to use it as a medium to transfer what little life force she had left. But if she did, she wouldn't be able to stay in this world any longer. Before anything could happen, Tsubaki reminded Takaru of their promise. Even though Takaru wasn't a fighter, he had to give it his all to protect others. This monster had crossed the line, and Takaru had no choice but to destroy her, right here and now. Watching Takaru fight, Tsubaki couldn't help but acknowledge his incredible healing powers. Without him, saving Kikyo would have been impossible. Before things got any worse, Tsubaki started to say everything she wanted to tell her sister. She admitted that she wasn't always a cheerful person, that she had her own moments of doubt where Kikyo couldn't see. When their parents died from illness, Tsubaki became the head of the family and had to live up to everyone's expectations. As a result, she had to bury her own anxieties and act as cheerful as possible. That's why she was jealous of Kikyo, who could show her feelings so openly. Sometimes it was a little gloomy, but if only Kikyo knew that every time she called her Nasama, it helped Tsubaki calm down and feel less alone. She would be so grateful. Kikyo was her most precious and beloved family, and she never wanted her to suffer alone. That's why she had to save her, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, it seemed Anira and Byuduan had reached the foot of the mountain. Since he couldn't help Kikyo, Byuduan had no choice but to leave everything to Anira. As Anira headed back up the mountain, Byuduan requested that more support be sent to Niigata in the Yomotsudake area. Even though he felt terrible for being so useless, he reminded himself not to get the wrong idea. He didn't become a hunter for anyone's approval model. Just like Kikyo, I'll protect everyone in my own way. Back with the two sisters, as Tsubaki healed her younger sister, Kikyo remembered what a wonderful person she was. Ever since they were children, Tsubaki had always been so supportive and cheerful, which is why everyone loved her. When her sister passed away, Kikyo was devastated, feeling as if everyone around her wished she had been the one to die, not her sister. From a young age, Kikyo had endured a deep emotional loneliness. She was weak at heart, even though she knew deep down that wasn't the case. She hated herself for it and wondered what would have happened if she were more like her sister. If she had Tsubaki's strength, maybe things would have been different. That's why Kikyo wanted to become strong, because if she didn't, she felt she could never measure up. Now, having accomplished what she set out to do, she couldn't help but feel lonely. Tsubaki, on the other hand, felt proud of her little sister because Kikyo had grown up so much. But there was no denying that Kikyo was still as clingy as ever. Seeing her sister's image, Kikyo couldn't hold back her tears, throwing her arms around Tsubaki. She confessed that she didn't have a reason and didn't know why she had to be strong for anyone. She was so worried and lonely, and that's why she wanted to be just like her sister. But she still felt so weak, which was probably why she couldn't defeat Naraku. Tsubaki suggested that it would be best for Kikyo to express those important feelings directly. As the battle between Takeru and Naraku intensified, Naraku seemed to be tiring, threatened by Takeru's power. She never expected someone like him to appear. According to Tsubaki's memories, there was only one person left who could wield divine power. So Naraku couldn't accept that all her efforts would end with her being trapped by Takeru in such a flimsy seal. Naraku vowed that once she broke free, she would make Takeru suffer. Meanwhile, Tsubaki was also doing everything in her power to defeat Naraku. Surprisingly, Tsubaki's spirit was still inside her own body. This meant Naraku wouldn't be able to escape easily, as Tsubaki would hold her back until the seal was destroyed. A part of Tsubaki was also sealed within Naraku's body, so she couldn't move much either. She would use what little she could to tell Naraku just how wonderful her little sister was. She began by saying that even if a flower was about to wither, Kikyo would never abandon it, caring for it until the very end. Hearing this made the others realize that Kikyo was a person of greater worth than they were. There was no doubt she would become someone important someday. Even though she hated studying and often ran away, she would always come back and apologize. In other words, Kikyo was the very model of potential. If Naraku thinks Kikyo is weak, then she is sorely mistaken. This child won't lose to someone like you. Hearing this, Kikyo felt a bit more motivated. Tsubaki continued, saying that she knew Kikyo had been through so much lately, and she was sorry for letting her little sister carry that burden all by herself. So you don't need to be like me because you have a unique strength that's all your own. The fact that you've made it this far is proof of that. That's why Tsubaki wanted Kikyo to remember that they loved everything about her, all the things that made her who she is. Now, all that was left was for Kikyo to accept herself. This moved Kikyo, and it undeniably gave her a small boost of confidence. Since this would be the last time they would see each other for a while, Tsubaki held her little sister tightly, saying goodbye but also promising to always protect her, even from afar. Now that things had become much more intense, Naraku was ready to make her move. But for some reason, Takeru truly surprised her. His power was unnatural, as if he were stronger than even the most powerful warriors in this world. A moment later, Kikyo appeared, looking completely healed. She now had the energy and determination to fight. She told Takeru that she felt like she could accomplish anything now, especially after her sister reminded her that she was strong just by being herself. At this point, her power was so immense it wasn't easy to control. Therefore, restraining it required immense willpower. As Kikyo launched her attack, Takeru couldn't deny that her power was now on a completely different level. Kikyo was ready to end this fight once and for all. Kikyo was ready to end this fight once and for all. This sudden turn of events was not what Naraku had expected. She tried to kill Kikyo and stop her in her tracks, because for some reason she felt that something was off about Kikyo. Suddenly, when threatened by something from Kikyo, before she could make a move, Anira appeared just in time, stopping Naraku in her tracks. Takeru was a bit surprised to see Anira here, but knew that Anira and Kikyo had been good friends since childhood. The scene was like something out of a movie. Naraku, looking furious, started stabbing at Anira to break free from her grip. But before she could seriously injure the girl, Takeru jumped in to help. With a single slash, Naraku was sent flying several meters away. While Naraku was still down, Takeru took the opportunity to heal Anira's wounds. However, Naraku now seemed more irritated than usual. But for some reason, she couldn't understand why Takeru and Anira were willing to stand aside and let Kikyo handle things on her own, even when they knew she was in a perilous situation. Takeru responded to her with a smug smile, implying that they no longer needed to go all out to protect Kikyo because she herself was now ready to fight Naraku alone. As the scene grew more tense, Kikyo focused her spirit while Naraku seemed stressed about the current turn of events. Kikyo began to chant the final incantations, unleashing the divine power of Eklanatha. This power was truly beyond all limits. Naraku felt as if she were being torn from Tsubaki's body, and it seemed she wasn't wrong. The divine power Kikyo had just summoned caused numerous changes in the atmosphere, forcing Naraku out of Tsubaki's body. Now that Naraku was outside, Takeru finally got a glimpse of Naraku's true form. Without hesitation, Takeru immediately rushed towards Naraku, determined to strike no matter what. At first, Naraku seemed quite calm, as she thought Takeru's attacks would be useless, since she was now in a spiritual state, so normal attacks wouldn't work on her. In reality, that didn't seem to be the case, too. But to her surprise, Takeru was able to strike Naraku down with just a single blow, leaving her utterly bewildered. As Takeru tried to defeat Naraku, she wondered why he could touch her, when theoretically he shouldn't be able to. In fact, Takeru was using divine flames, which were very effective against demons like Naraku. Moreover, Takeru was no ordinary magic user, as he was highly skilled in fire magic. Needless to say, Naraku was suffering all kinds of pain right now. To ensure this would be the end for Naraku, Takeru held her in place so that Kikyo could cast her fatal spell on the stubborn demon. As they stood still, waiting for Kikyo to cast the spell to end things once and for all, Takeru could feel the power radiating everywhere. Kikyo, on the other hand, also felt an immense source of power surging towards her. It was so powerful that she began to feel like her body was about to break. If she wasn't careful, there was a high chance this power would leave her. She tried to concentrate, focusing all her attention on accumulating power, visualizing the image of flames wrapping around the sword. Since she could only make one swing right now, Kikyo also had to consider Takeru's safety. Although it seemed like an easy task, Kikyo was under a lot of pressure. She couldn't afford to miss this shot, because if she did, Takeru could very well be endangered in the process. She also realized that her past self would never have been able to do this. The old Kikyo could never have controlled this power. However, now that she was confident in her own strength, she knew everything would be fine. So she didn't want to doubt herself any longer. With fervor and determination to end this chaos, Kikyo made a powerful swing, praying for the evil spirit to be incinerated. Flames began to engulf the surroundings, the heat from the fire making everyone feel a burning sensation on their skin. In the process of unleashing the divine power from the heavens, the mission Kikyo had trained for so long was finally complete, as Naraku had been defeated. Takeru rushed over to Kikyo to help her, noticing she looked exhausted after what she had just been through. After a long day, they finally returned to the mansion where Buduan was awaiting their return. As soon as they arrived, Takeru announced that the Hunters Association was working to manage the area, but they wanted Kikyo to come to the headquarters first. Kikyo understood this very well, as there was still much to be done. She thought that she would also have to find a new place, which made Takeru wonder if that meant she would be leaving here for good. With a smile on her face, Kikyo replied frankly that it had already been decided. She was only here to watch over the seal, but now that it was gone, she thought it was time to rely on outsiders to take care of the dragon vein. Besides, it wasn't reasonable for one person to have to do everything. With the plan settled, Byudoan excused himself to start packing, and Takeru went with him. When they were back inside the mansion, Kikyo began to think about how confident she had been that the attack wouldn't affect Takeru. When Naraku was thrown from Tsubaki's body, Kikyo recalled what Takeru had told her, that she wasn't possessed by a demon, but was simply not an enemy in his eyes. In the end, good and evil are both subjective concepts. She wondered if Takeru considered her a good person, but instead of worrying, she decided to be more optimistic from now on. She thought that if she continued to strive to be like her sister Tsubaki, her sister would surely have no trouble passing on her power to her. With a bright smile on her face, Kikyo was ready to live a life true to herself. While Kikyo and the others celebrated their unexpected victory, some of Naraku's subordinates couldn't seem to believe that one of their strongest members had been defeated, truly losing someone who seemed to be their leader. They began to wonder if any humans knew of their actions, or if they were just overthinking things. To ensure everything still went according to plan, the leader intends to look into this matter thoroughly to ensure safety. Back to Takeru. It seems he was having a pleasant dream, where he and other children were happily playing outside on the grass. Everything was wonderful until he suddenly woke up, his mind filled with questions. On his way to school, Takeru still couldn't believe he'd had such a strange dream. In fact, more than a dream, it felt like one of Takeru's real memories. If he remembered correctly from the dream, Takeru was about 5 or 6 years old. Now that he thought about it, when he tried to learn about Takeru and looked through photo albums, he couldn't find any pictures of Takeru before he turned 6. According to his parents, when they moved, his father had completely deleted all the data. And if Takeru remembered correctly, Kikyo had mentioned before that separated souls often wander in places they have a connection to. So, to find Kusanagi Takuru's soul, he might need to learn more about his own past. But for now, it seemed he had other things to deal with first. While on his way to school, Sakura suddenly called him. Apparently, a small problem had come up, and Sakura wanted to talk to Takeru about it. As politely as possible, Takeru replied to Sakura's message. But what awaited him at school was something he hadn't expected at all. It turned out that after a discussion with the Hunter Association, it was decided that Kikyo would start working at the academy as a part-time teacher. This came as a surprise to the other students, but Takeru wasn't shocked at all, since this was the first time in a long while that Kikyo had decided to appear in public. So what better for her to do than teach the students? After Kikyo was introduced, the school also announced that they had decided to have the academy participate in an exchange program with Hoshimiya, and as a result, an S-rank hunter named Saiju Karen would be staying at the academy until next spring, which made everyone quite excited. After the ceremony, no one could believe that 2 of the best S-rank hunters had appeared at their school, especially the hunter Saiju Karen. Karen was considered the best student of all time at the prestigious Hoshimiya Academy, so having her stay at their academy for months seemed like a dream come true for many. Knowing that Takeru used to be a huge fan of Saiju Karen before his amnesia, this came as a huge surprise to Takeru as they hadn't had much time to talk about that topic. The 2 of them then went their separate ways. On his way home, Takeru happened to see Kikyo and Sakura talking. Without hesitation, Kikyo called out to Takeru, which surprised Sakura a little since she didn't expect the 2 of them to know each other. Curiously, she asked how they met. Kikyo immediately replied that the 2 of them were actually very close. So close that they had seen each other naked, referring to the time Kikyo accidentally bathed while Takeru was still in the spring. Of course, Sakura got the wrong idea, so the 2 of them immediately tried to clear things up. After everything was clarified, Sakura understood both sides of the story. Now that things had settled down, Takeru asked Sakura what she wanted to talk about. Sakura immediately informed Takeru that after he destroyed the Ouroboros Guild, the leadership of the Hunter Association found out about it. But from what Sakura had observed, the president himself handled the matter and seemed to be investigating Takeru in secret. So Sakura wondered if Takeru knew the president personally. Since Takeru didn't have the original Takeru's memories, this made him wonder how the president of the Hunter Association knew him. The fact was, Sakura didn't know what their intentions were, as there were many bad rumors going around. This time, 2 S-rank hunters had shown up, so Sakura thought it was to monitor Takeru. Kikyo said that she wasn't here for that reason, and that she hadn't heard anything. To warn Takeru, she mentioned that her older sister had left the association because it was suspicious, so she had only joined to receive help. It would be best for Takeru to be careful since they were talking about S-ranks monitoring him. Kikyo immediately thought of Saiju, who had been at the ceremony earlier. Just as they started talking about her, Saiju appeared, surprising everyone by saying she was just waiting for them to finish their conversation. Without hesitation, Sakura asked Saiju if she had come to the school to monitor Takeru. But since that wasn't why she was there, she immediately denied the accusation. However, what she did next shocked everyone. She threw her arms around Takeru, saying she had always wanted to meet him. Even though she knew Takeru might have lost his memories, she still wanted to be with him. Hearing this was very interesting for Takeru, as he truly hoped to learn more about the real Takeru. So, although it seemed a bit absurd, he asked Saiju to tell him more about his past. Saiju seemed willing to grant Takeru's request, but on one condition: if Takeru agreed to take her on a date. Now, Takeru had no choice but to go along with Saiju's request, and he started wondering what he should even do on a date. After all, this was all new to Takeru, since he and Edelweiss had only gone shopping a few times before, which to him didn't even count as a date. But since there was nothing else he could do, and he wanted to learn more about the real Takeru, he could only hope for the best. After waiting for a few minutes, Saiju finally arrived in a simple but attractive outfit. As soon as she arrived, she immediately asked Takeru what he thought of her outfit, as she had put a lot of effort into achieving a mature look. Although he was uncomfortable with Saiju being so close, he tried to stay calm, as this was the only way he could learn more about the real Takeru. As the two began their date, the other members of the guild saw them, making everyone wonder if Takeru was dating both Sakura and Saiju. If that were true, he was a true legend. Although the guild wanted to meddle in their lives, they eventually realized it wasn't a good idea at all. Back to Takeru and Saiju, it seems the two had arrived at a cafe. Saiju decided to act more mature today, and she was debating whether to order the new frappuccino or something stronger. Seeing Saiju struggling to choose, Takeru said that he would just have the same thing as her. Saiju really liked that, and their day went pretty well. She kept asking him not to be so formal with her, because it would just make them both feel awkward. Eventually, they started to feel comfortable with each other. Takeru finally worked up the courage to ask Saiju where they had met before. According to Saiju, there was a time when they gathered children at a high altitude to attract mana, and she met Takeru there, and they started to get to know each other. This made Takeru wonder if he really had that much mana before. Without hesitation, Saiju said that yes, he did, even more than her. But if everything Saiju said was true, why did the real Takeru let Araki bully him when he could have fought back? As the date went on, Takeru began to wonder who the real owner of this body was. After eating at the cafe, the two of them lay down together on a grassy field. In this moment, Takeru couldn't explain how he felt or what this situation was, as it seemed Saiju truly remembered her moments with the real Takeru. Takeru apologized, saying that if she were here with the real Takeru, it would have been a precious memory. In the middle of their beautiful afternoon, a group of two strangers started rushing towards them, intending to attack. But before things could get worse, Takeru managed to shield Saiju. However, surprisingly, it seemed this was Saiju's plan all along. She had been suspicious of Takeru because the magic he used was stronger than an ordinary person's. Takeru tried to explain that ever since he lost his memory, he'd been able to use it. But Saiju didn't accept this answer, because according to her, even if Takeru had a high mana capacity, his physical body wasn't suited for magic. Therefore, there was no way the real Takeru could have used magic. Hearing this left Takeru feeling confused, but Saiju continued, saying that Takeru losing his memory meant nothing, unless he had become someone else with magical power that suited his body. Saiju demanded that Takeru give back the friend she cherished most, because if he didn't, she would never forgive him. Now that Saiju was furious, she didn't hesitate to launch a deadly attack on Takeru, and Takeru had no idea what to do. In the midst of this chaos, Takeru started to remember the time he and Edelweiss practiced magic. He kept failing, and Edelweiss reminded him that he couldn't master magic. Takeru felt that with the way things were, he wouldn't be able to use his mana powers in populated areas anymore. To comfort him, Edelweiss said that she thought it was because he had too much mana, which made it difficult to control. She suggested that instead of trying to hit the target directly, Takeru should consider the surrounding elements and try to keep them safe. At that moment, Takeru got an idea for his next move. Seeing him go, Edelweiss felt happy, and recalled what others had said about people with excellent magic control often being talented individuals. If Takeru was trying to save them, even though they were complete strangers to him, it was safe to say that he would succeed in no time. Remembering these fond memories, Takeru gained more strength to fight for his light. As Saiju's fire monster began to attack, Takeru tried to counter with his own power. While fighting, he tried to plead with Saiju to listen to him. But it seemed Saiju had no intention of doing so. As the battle intensified, Takeru did his best just to survive. Watching Saiju in action, Takeru noticed she was swift in her attacks and seemed accustomed to fighting. Based on his observations, Takeru saw that Saiju was using high-level magic, but there was no obvious damage to the surrounding areas. This meant she had refined control over her magic, hurting only her target. The fire attribute is said to be very difficult to control, but Hunter Saiju can manipulate it freely at will. That's probably why she's so renowned. Takeru knew that if he could just defeat her to solve this, things would be so much easier. But the thought of the real Takeru made Saiju furious, and since he knew this was all his fault, Takeru couldn't bring himself to attack her. So he started to think about what he should do if he couldn't get her to listen to him. Seeing Takeru move, Saiju's suspicion only grew, as she knew the real Takeru could never move like that. He just didn't have those kinds of reflexes. The real Takeru couldn't use magic either, so even though this man looked just like Takeru, Saiju knew he was completely different. Just thinking about it made Saiju feel like she was going to lose her mind. In the midst of this chaotic battle, Saiju suddenly recalled a time when she and Takeru were just children. It seemed that among all the other kids, Takeru was the only one who loved Saiju's fire powers, even when she hated her own flames. It was as if Takeru couldn't help but love them. This made Saiju feel a little emotional. That's why, from then on, Saiju tried her best, working hard so that the flames that once burned Takeru would never hurt him again. So, if this really was Takeru's body, then she was sorry. But she would never forgive anyone who tried to control the love of her life. That's why, even though she was trying to avoid this, she had no choice but to use her flames to force that imposter out of Takeru's body. But before she could incinerate everything around her, Takeru leaped up, pinning her to the ground. It seemed Saiju was starting to lose control of her magic. If she kept increasing her power, there was a huge risk that she would burn herself to death. So, Takeru tried to keep her calm in this moment. To help her a little, Takeru slowly poured some of his mana into her while he controlled her magic. But no matter what he did, it seemed the power just kept increasing. Any more of this would end badly for Saiju. To calm her down, Takeru said that if she truly loved the real Takeru, she should stop forcing it, as this would only lead to a terrible outcome. To ease her mind, Takeru decided to tell her the truth, that her suspicions weren't wrong, as he was not the real Takeru. But the body she was seeing was Takeru's, and he promised to return it to her no matter what. However, despite this, it seemed Saiju had no plans to calm down. But Takeru, with great patience, assured her that everything would be okay, regardless of what she thought. He wanted the real Takeru to come back too. The smile on Takeru's face reminded Saiju of their childhood. So, even though it was a lot for her to take in, she began to trust Takeru, little by little. Then the magical rampage subsided and it seemed Saiju had regained control. However, before he could do anything, Saiju suddenly started to cry. It seemed it was still very difficult for Saiju to accept that the person standing before her wasn't the friend she had always known. Saiju thought she had calmed down, but in reality she couldn't handle it. This made her realize that it wasn't the right time for them to meet again, and she started to feel like she wasn't making any progress. Although she had hoped for so much, at least the situation was now calmer than before. Saiju immediately demanded that Takeru tell her what was really going on and who he really was. After a few minutes of explanation, Saiju and her subordinates finally understood the situation. According to what Takeru explained, he had actually been summoned to another world, saved it, and then died. Coincidentally, as soon as he woke up, he was in Takeru's body. However, even though they could accept the fact that Takeru's story was true, how could they prove that the body he had taken over really belonged to Takeru? There was really no clear answer to this, as he didn't have access to the real Takeru's memories. After thinking for a moment, Takeru informed Saiju that one of Takeru's friends had said that Takeru had always been cheering her on since they were children. So even though the two of them had grown distant, the real Takeru still followed Saiju's activities. Hearing this made Saiju blush, as she didn't really expect that Takeru thought of her so often. Now, excited, she was ready to help Takeru get her friend's body back. Although taking in all the information at once was overwhelming for her, Saiju was trying her best to trust him. To help Takeru a little, she would try to investigate this matter logically. But first, she asked for his real name. To her surprise, he also had the same name as Takeru. But for that reason, Saiju decided to call him Takeru for the time being, since if she used his last name, it would be a hassle to explain to others. Saiju then asked if he had any idea how to return Takeru's body. Based on what she learned from Kikyo, souls often wander in places they have an attachment to. Takeru had tried to learn about his past and even asked his parents about everything, but it seemed he couldn't find any good leads. So he wanted to stay close to Saiju so she could tell him more about the real Takeru. To help him, Saiju told him to go to a specific location at 10 a.m. the next day. As soon as Takeru saw the marked location, he was surprised to realize it was a crazy place, deep in the mountains. Although he was a bit confused, Saiju told him to trust her because she would explain everything tomorrow. She hoped he wouldn't reveal to anyone that he was going there. With that, their date finally came to an end. As Saiju stepped out to leave, she told one of her subordinates, Sway, to investigate Takeru's circumstances further, as well as the disappearance of Yamato Takeru 40 years ago. The next day, Takeru finally arrived, and without wasting any time, Saiju immediately led Takeru inside, hoping it would jog his memory. The entire place was in ruins and looked like it hadn't been used in years. It turned out this was actually a research facility, but it was also where Takeru and she had grown up. This confused Takeru, so Saiju explained that as a child, she didn't know what they researched here. However, when she was 7 years old, the Hunters Association investigated this facility and shut it down. All she knew was that they gathered people with high mana here, so she hoped Takeru would recover some of his memories. Furthermore, she had also heard that Takeru had actually died when he was only 6 years old. So when she saw him in the association's video, she was very surprised. Was the body Takeru now possessed really his? Saiju had partially found the answer when she hugged him tightly at the park. After all, no one could mistake the sense of touch when it came to memories. Then, she went on to explain that after this facility was shut down, children like her who had no parents or relatives were taken in for adoption by the association. She thought Takeru was one of them too. And since he hadn't heard anything from his parents, it meant he shouldn't trust them too much either. At first, Takeru didn't want to believe this, but Saiju made him realize that there was no way the association would allow someone untrustworthy to adopt one of their talented children. Even if that might be true, Takeru still felt that his parents' love for him was genuine. Hearing that made him feel a little sad. After all, once you start doubting something, it becomes very difficult to stop. As Yamato Takeru, his relationship with his parents wasn't good. But it was different for this Takeru, as he could clearly feel that his parents loved him very much. If he lived a little longer and put in more effort than Yamato Takeru, he wondered if he could have understood people's feelings better. But there was no reason to think about that now. What he needed to do was move forward. As they went deeper into the facility, it seemed there were monsters roaming around as well. Probably because the place had become deserted, so he needed to be careful and not cause any more destruction. While they fought off each monster, Takeru couldn't help but feel amazed by Saiju's skill. She seemed able to keep up with his movements, even though she was used to being on the front lines, and her switching between support and offense was amazing. There was no doubt she was truly experienced in fighting in a team environment, something he hoped to learn in the future. As the fight continued, Saiju noticed that the number of monsters was rather strange. It seemed a large gate was broken somewhere. If they didn't deal with it immediately, it would surely cause a lot of damage to the facility. Thinking that he had finally reached a place where he could find clues, he would do his best to make sure nothing stood in his way again. Surprisingly, they were able to handle everything in one go. As they started to walk around the facility again, Takeru's memories began to return bit by bit. It was a memory that Saiju shared. It seemed that when they were kids, the two of them had decided to bury a time capsule. Maybe that would help him recover his memories, but before he could check, Saiju called out to him because another monster had appeared. Fortunately, Takeru was able to handle it with his weapon. At this point, Saiju was starting to find it hard to keep up with him, even though she was the S-rank hunter here. Although she knew she should report everything about this to the association, she still felt guilty for putting Takeru in this situation yesterday, so she tried to remain as calm as possible for now. Despite the possibility that Takeru was her enemy, she just tried to be more observant for the time being. While she was pondering on the side, Takeru was wondering why he was suddenly seeing all these images. He wondered if these were Takeru's memories, or if there was something Takeru wanted to tell him. With everything in the information room now gone, it was as if their memories had been stolen. Takeru asked Saiju if she remembered that. They had buried a time capsule before. At first, she was shocked to hear this and didn't expect Takeru to remember anything at all. But then, after he explained that he had been seeing images, Saiju started to recall something important. When they were looking for a place to bury the time capsule, they had accidentally come across a door leading to the basement. But a staff member told them it was a strange area with hazardous materials, so entry was forbidden. So they buried the time capsule in the courtyard instead. With that said, before checking the time capsule, Seiju decided to check the basement first. As they went inside, she suddenly felt a cold chill, as if she was trying to uncover something she shouldn't know. With every step, she seemed to start feeling the weight of the past, as if her precious memories were slowly crumbling. Noticing this, Takeru assured her that no matter what happened, he would do something to fix it. So there's no reason for you to worry at all. As the conversation became more relaxed, a dark presence began to envelop the entire place. Immediately, Takeru went to investigate. To his surprise, it seemed the monsters that had been following him were here as well. Even they hadn't expected Takeru to be here. But now that they were here, Takeru felt it was time to use force and make them reveal everything they knew.